At a nearby farm, the A59 is partly blocked eastbound there, causing delays. On Merseyside, St Luke's Road in Southport remains closed for an investigation, and the A565 is partly blocked southbound for repairs between Ainsdale and Formby, causing queues. In Derbyshire, the A617 is closed eastbound from Hasland to Temple Normanton after an accident, with delays through Chesterfield. On the M6 in the West Midlands, there's a lane closed northbound after a vehicle caught fire between junctions 5 and 6 towards Spaghetti Junction, Birmingham, with delays from junction 4A for the M42. And in Norfolk, the A148 is closed in both directions off Clipbush Lane in Fakenham after an accident causing delays. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
One local cricket team was made up entirely of one family, the Jollens.
The Newmarket midweek seconds played Thurlow and Old Millgreenian seconds, captained by, here we go, James Jolland. He played alongside family members Henry, Freddie, George, Jack, Archie, Ryan, Brandon and Daniel. Even if slightly controversial, one of the umpires was a Jolland to Stephen the umpire.
Yes, well, the Jolland family mostly live in Wickenbrook in Suffolk and have played for 4 years for Dullingham Village team before it merged with Newmarket. So that's the entire backstory. We're delighted to be joined now by Captain James Jolland and teammate and brother Nick Jolland. Really good to see you both this morning. This is incredible. How did you get the entire family involved in cricket?
Well, we started the club about 3 years ago, and it was more friends and family. But then it had this opportunity of this week to get everyone involved, because everyone was back and they all played cricket, various levels, and the youngest being 12, George. And we're all available, so we thought 1 week we'd do the whole team.
You booted the friends out for 1 week only?
Yeah, they were very good about it. They come and watched. They supported us.
How did the other team feel about having an umpire with related ties?
Well, the captain of the Thurlow is one of our friends. We do know him, so he was fine with it, and there was no controversial decisions at all.
I think it's a fantastic strategy.
No, yeah.
You could plant somebody.
That's the way
in a position of authority. It's a great idea.
Oh, look, here's the scorecard we can see on the screen with all of your names on there. Some fantastic English names on there. How does it get between the family members? Is it very, very competitive between you all?
As you get older, you work on that, don't you? And you keep that competitiveness out of it. And it's really to play with your sons. It's a great thing to do.
Yeah, it's a lovely
We've
thing
all
to
got
do.
sons in it. That's why we do it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good morning, 9:30 on Wednesday, the 31st of July, live across the United Kingdom, Britain's Newsroom with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Very good morning, thank you for joining us. So the 3 young girls killed in the Southport stabbing attack have been named. Bevy King, aged 6, Elsie Stankham, aged 7, and Alice Aguirre, aged 9.
And the shocking riots in Southport, almost 40 police officers injured last night when they came under attack outside a local mosque.
Yes, well, the sound of sirens punctuated the night here in Southport, but today the clean-up begins.
Meanwhile, after the horrors of last night, the community continue to come together in memory of those 3 little girls.
Thank you both. And lawless Britain overnight, 6 people have been arrested after a machete fight broke out in Southend-on-Sea. More evidence of broken Britain. We'll bring you the pictures. We're seeing them now. Really shocking, fighting with huge machetes just near the children's fairground.
Hugh Edwards, the BBC presenter, has arrived at Westminster Magistrates today, charged with making 37 indecent images of children. Shocking scenes, weren't they?
Awful.
As if that community has not been through enough. Is that what the mums and dads of those 3 little girls want? A mob torching shops and torching police cars and putting 37 police officers, 27 of them are in hospital.
Understandable, isn't it, though? There's so much anger, there's so much frustration. People feel like their lives are not getting any better. There's so much pent-up frustration out there. How do you explain it? gbnews.com/your say. First, the very latest news with Sophia Wensler.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 9:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer has accused those involved in a riot in Southport last night of hijacking a peaceful vigil with violence and thuggery. He said they'd insulted the community as it grieves the 3 young girls who were killed in Monday's stabbing attack and warned they'd feel the full force of the law. It started when a group of around 300 people who'd gathered outside a mosque turned on police, throwing rocks larger than bricks and setting cars alight. Many were supporters of the English Defence League and were not from Southport. They'd been encouraged by false posts on social media, which claimed the attacker was Muslim. Nearly 40 officers were injured and 27 taken to hospital. Jenny Stankum, whose daughter Elsie died in Monday's attack, pleaded on social media for the violence to end, saying the police have been nothing but heroic. They and we don't need this. One local resident told GB News some of the violence appeared to be coordinated.
It was all people from outside of town that were brought in buses and cars. They got changed when they got here into the streets, and then they started to riot with the police, set a police van on fire, and all hell broke loose.
We could see on social media this was being planned. There are far-right fascist groups just seized the opportunity, seized on misinformation on the internet to mobilise and spread their hateful agenda.
In other news, former BBC presenter Hugh Edwards arrived in court moments ago, charged with making indecent images of children. The 62-year-old is alleged to have committed 3 offences between December 2020 and April 2022. The veteran broadcaster is accused of having photographs on WhatsApp, including 6 of the most serious type. And Hamas's top political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, has been killed during an attack on the Iranian capital. The terror group is publicly blaming Israel for the attack. Israel hasn't commented yet, but has previously vowed to eliminate Hamas's leaders. The strike comes hours after a senior Hezbollah commander was killed in the Lebanese capital, Beirut. The attacks immediately raised fears of further escalation, with Qatar warning that it undermines the chances of peace and the region risks slipping into chaos. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler, more in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good morning and welcome to Britain's Newsroom. We're live across the UK on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner. The morning after, the night before, those shocking scenes in Southport.
Well, we saw the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, over in Southport yesterday. He's warned rioters there that they will feel the full force of the law for having hijacked, in his words, a vigil for knife attack victims.
And if you're listening on the radio, the scenes on television shows a police van ablaze. How on earth does that help the families of those little girls who've been savagely murdered come to terms with the awful horrors that have been inflicted on this community? 37 police officers injured, 27 in hospital.
That's right. There were violent clashes last night with police outside a mosque. As Andrew said, 39 police officers suffering fractures and concussions. Of course, this is the fatal stabbings. 3 young girls. Others lost their lives, very sadly. We can see them here. 7-year-old Elsie Stankum, Alice Da Silva Aguirre, who is 9, and 6-year-old Bebby King.
Aren't they gorgeous? Aren't they gorgeous?
Beautiful.
Just lovely, innocent. Remember what they were doing? They were doing a Taylor Swift dance class. And if you go to a Taylor Swift concert, one of the things is you exchange those friendship bracelets, and they were making friendship bracelets when hell stalked into that room.
Well, 5 children and 2 adults are still in hospital, some of them in a critical condition. So let's go over to Southport and speak to our reporters. Will Hollis and Sophie Reaper. Morning, Will. We can see activity going on behind you there. I presume this is the clean-up operation.
Yes, well, last night People were here in Southport trying to tear the streets apart, but today the community is putting it back together. This building in the background, this red brick building, is the mosque, which was really the centre of the riot, where people were throwing bricks, smashing windows of the cars, and from the pictures that we've seen and we filmed here last night, set police cars on fire. But what's happening right now is members of the community, some of them people that are professionals that do this kind of thing every day, others are little children armed with brushes, tearing down a wall that they say is broken and can't be used for a wall anymore, and they're putting it into the trucks. And this street, when we started filming here a couple of hours ago, was covered in bricks and rubble, and as the people started to come out of their houses, they started to clear it all away. It was something quite inspirational to see after what happened last night. Bricks flying through the air, 10, 20 of them at a time, smashing into the arms, the rows and rows of police officers. We know that 39 of those police officers have been treated by the North West Ambulance Service. They said that every single officer, every single person that they treated last night was a police officer. The police have arrested people, and they've also put a dispersal order in place to stop people from coming back to Southport and giving them extra powers. The local MP here, Patrick Thurley, has said that this is not what Southport represents, and these people are not from Southport. The Merseyside Police Crime Commissioner says that these are people that have come from outside, and they believe that it's members of the English Defence League. People have been describing them as far-right fascists this morning, and one person that we spoke to, a man called Norman Wallace, he was telling me that this place looked like a war zone, but it wasn't people from Southport that did this.
That's Will Hollis. Let's talk now to Sophie Reaper. Sophie.
Well, we're just less than half a mile away from where Will is this morning. We're at the scene where that attack on Monday took place. There's a much larger police presence here this morning than there was when we were reporting from here yesterday, and I imagine that's following the events of last night. Now, this morning, although it's now been over 48 hours, or it's just almost 48 hours since the attack, we're still seeing members of the community coming out. They've been continuing to lay flowers. I know when we spoke to you yesterday, there were perhaps only a dozen bunches of flowers here. There are now well over 100. I'd say 200-300 bunches, in fact, as well as lots of messages and cuddly toys, all left in memory. But what the members of the community have also been doing this morning is speaking to some of the officers that are here and thanking them for what they did last night, for defending the community. We've spoken to people this morning who said that they lived in the area, that they were watching it happen, and they wanted to do what they could to try and stop it, because that's not what they are about. The people of Southport, we heard one lady say this morning, she said, this is not Southport. This, of course, is a small residential seaside town here in the northwest. This kind of thing really just doesn't happen here. Now, yesterday, of course, we heard the names of those three little girls who lost their lives, Bibi, Elsie and Alice. They're 6, 7 and 9 years old. Just unbelievable that this is something that we're talking about. They lost their lives, of course. They went to a Taylor Swift dance and yoga class. Of course, the Taylor Swift fan club have raised, the last time I checked, it was £277,000 that they had raised, and that's gone up by over 5,000 in the last hour alone. So incredible amounts of support coming, not just from the community, but all over the country.
OK, Sophie, thank you so much. And Will Hollis and Sophie Reaper there in Southport, thank you very much. Just to clarify, that fundraising, this is because Taylor Swift spoke out and said how awful it was. And, of course, the Swifties, as they're called, the fans, they just want to do something, I guess. They've raised money for the families.
And, you know, that money could even be used as some form of monument.
I'm sure they will do something.
Yeah, they'll do something, and extraordinary scenes. Let's talk to Theo Ashwood, political commentator. Theo and I have known each other many years. I'm trying to decide what to call you, because I knew you when you were political editor of LBC. Theo, this riot was predicated on a social media myth.
Yes.
That we have to be very careful because there's nobody been charged yet, but that they were labouring under the illusion, willfully or not, that the person who's been arrested had come to this country on a small boat and is a Muslim. Actually, the person who's been arrested we can go no further than that, is a 17-year-old who was born in Cardiff. And as we pointed out with Mark White yesterday, this station has not named the person who's been arrested because the law says we can't, because he is regarded in the eyes of the law as a child.
I know a bit about this because I used to cover courts, but before I was at LBC, I worked as a reporter covering courts in the East Midlands. So when you arrest somebody who is a child and charge somebody who is a child, there's something called a Section 39 order. That individual cannot be named by law. And so there's so any of your viewers who might be at home thinking, hang on a moment, GB News haven't named him or any other broadcasters haven't named him, there's some sort of conspiracy of silence, you would find your managing editors and editors would find themselves in the dock very quickly if they and that's just the law of the land.
That's right.
Now, what can happen and what may well happen is there may be an application before the criminal, if there are to be criminal proceedings, for that order to be lifted so that the individual can be named.
Often happens after the case.
99% of times it happens after the case when the individual has been sentenced. Now, when you're at that kind of age limit where it's 17, 18, well, obviously 18 they can be named, but if you're at 16, 17, there's a greater likelihood that an individual can be named. When you get down, when you're talking about kids aged 10 and 11, that's not going to happen. But there may be the police may look at this and actually say, we would like to ask for this order to be lifted so the individual can be named and we can clear this up once and for all, given the specific circumstances of this case and given the way the rumours have been spreading.
The mother of Elsie, Jenny Stankham, one of the little girls who lost her life, she said that this is the only thing that I will write. This was on Twitter last night. But please stop the violence in Southport. The police have been nothing but heroic these last 24 hours. They and we don't need this.
Absolutely right.
Looking at the images here, Theo, why did this case act as a trigger to this sort of violence, do you think?
So I think if you look at what's happened over the last 24 hours, you've had the rumours spreading online, pushed by bots, pushed by far-right activists, and indeed there is, the Daily Telegraph reporting saying that, looking at potentially state actors like Russia could potentially be...
This isn't social media. This isn't 24 hours of social media has not led to this amount of violence. This is 25 years.
Well, I do make a distinction, and I'll come on to that in a moment. So you have far-right activists, and that, I think, has been pushed on social media. I think that's a great message from the mum. But there is, I think, also hurt in the community. And there was a very interesting clip when Keir Starmer came up yesterday to lay that wreath, and you had the men shouting off, and they didn't have Scouse accents, let's face it, they'd been shipped in. But at the very end, there was a woman who broke down saying, I knew the 9-year-old girl, I held her and I knew her and I know her mum, and you're Prime Minister, why aren't you doing something? And I think what happens is that in this particular case you have the far right is able to take advantage.
Do you think, what do you mean by the far right though? Because I wouldn't have thought many of those people at that riot are political. They're just fed up. They don't see themselves as being a political far-right person. I think they're just sick of the life that they lead. They're sick of seeing enormous amounts of people living in their communities who they don't think are like them. And that is not to excuse that violence, but there's a problem that started with Tony Blair 25 years ago. So
there is a problem, I think, around community cohesion in this country. I think it's a big problem. And I've said this before in response to this, what's happened in Southport, is that there is a problem and this government doesn't have a plan. And I was speaking to somebody, senior in the Labour Party, saying before the election, you need a plan to deal with community cohesion and to deal with integration, to bring people together rather than having disparate communities. And of course, on the other side, things have been, exacerbated by the conflict in the Middle East as well, which has, of course, created huge problems in certain communities in that area. And then, of course, on the other, you have, what's happened up in Southport, which is not the people of Southport, but people coming in and, using it as a launch pad for this senseless violence, which has no place in that particular community. But what the government needs to do is it can't just step back and say, well, this is a problem on social media and we're going, there's nothing we can do or there's nothing we can... They need to be leaning into this and sorting this problem out.
Well, what do they do?
Well, I think if you want a short-term answer, right, if I looked at that image of Keir Starmer laying that wreath, I think, yes, he's the Prime Minister, but he didn't have a connection with the people when he went up there. It was a bit too robotic. If I was looking at that, do I think Angela Rayner should have been making a statement in the House of Commons about housing? You know, she's from Stockport, which is on the other side of the M6, but she knows those people up in that part of the world. She's a mum, she's a nana. And I would have said, actually, if Labour wants to be a team, you know, a government, and they want to operate as a team, I'd be saying to Angela Rayner, we really need your help on this, actually. Can you get up there? Because if Angela Rayner had stepped in, drop everything, forget the housing, for goodness sake.
They could do it the next day.
Next day. You know, I think we may be in a position over the summer, actually, where Parliament has to be recalled. Get Angela Rayner up there, because if Angela Rayner had gone, you know what, sod the reef, get rid of the reef, I'm going to go over and give that woman a hug, then I think it would have been a very different story. Forget the men, don't worry about the men, but actually, you know, somebody, they need to have a human connection, a human touch, and they need to get on top of it now.
I just think that people see right through that. When they wheel out Angela Rayner because she happens to have a northern accent, I just think that people of Southport are smarter than that. They know what she's used for.
No, I don't.
They're not going to. These people are angry. They're angry. They're not just angry at Keir Starmer. They're angry at feeling like their identity, their lives, their Britishness, their safety on British streets has been compromised by what they see as unfettered immigration for 20-odd years. And that's where I think it's Keir Starmer. If you wanted to make a statement about that, then make a statement about that.
Sorry, the clock's beaten us.
Sorry, Steve. Don't go anywhere. You're staying with us anyway.
You're staying with us. We're going for a short break.
Good afternoon, Britain. Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
You'll relate to this one. We've all been there, haven't we? Tensions high in the car as you head off on the latest adventure or holiday during the summer break.
Now, with the average family set to spend about 3.5 hours a week together in the car driving on the roads during the holidays, new research has shown that our relationships could be tested to the limit.
Yes, figures show that 21% are having arguments for simple things like the driver going the wrong way, which we were saying is not actually very simple. That's very serious.
I was going to say that. I'm surprised it's just 21%. Yes. If I was going the wrong way down the road,
you'd know about it.
You'd hear from me.
A further 20% squabbling over how their partner drives, yes, and 25% admitting to being more prone to rowing when their kids are misbehaving. It's a lot to deal with, isn't it?
Fair enough.
Well, we're joined now by dating and relationship coach and author Persia Lawson. Good to see you this morning, Persia. What is it about being in a car that just makes things so tense?
Well, I think it's probably quite obvious, isn't it? It's the fact that we are in a confined space, we can't go anywhere, and it can just really create so much tension and stress, especially if you and your other half or a family member, whoever you're in the car with, are going through a little bit of a tricky time. And if it's really hot outside, that doesn't help either. So inevitably, it creates a lot of irritation and bickering, I would say, from my experience.
And what is it about children? If you add children into the mix, it just makes things very, very difficult, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, because there's a lot of, are we there yet?
Yeah.
Kicking the back seat and just squabbles, kicking the siblings. So adding children into the mix is just going to turn the heat up on that tension.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom.
And just to add to the idea that crime is out of control here, these extraordinary images came out of Southend where police officers had to where 6 young men were fighting with machetes very close to Southend Pier. There's a fairground there, children, it's summer holiday time, running amok. Broad daylight, extraordinary.
With
long machetes, which should have been banned. I thought they were supposed to have been banned by the last government months ago. Theo, this feeds into the idea that the police are losing control of the streets.
Yes, and it's it's lawless Britain, isn't it? I mean, this has suddenly become the #1 issue. Everything else that we've been talking about, Keir Starmer has had a relatively... It's been well planned, fair play to Number 10 and to the government, the last 3 weeks since they took power. But actually now all of that shifts to the sidelines. It's events have taken over. And, I watched that footage with horror, but not a great deal of surprise. To see, because living in London, I've seen similar, not as bad, but I've seen similar.
This is Lethe Southend, where people like to go for a day out to walk on the promenade.
And it's an adventure park.
Yeah.
And these are 3-foot-long machetes wielding that they're wielding. And I mean, I don't mind if they kill each other, Theo, but it's other people get caught up in it, and our police yet again being forced to take... I mean, they're going to have to be armed and armour-plated at some point. But the problem is that this is Southend. This isn't the Palace of Westminster. Westminster, you're used to seeing armed police, and it's almost perfectly normal. But you don't necessarily want to see that.
No,
as you say,
you don't want armed police
Southend.
in this country.
It's not the way we do policing. And there is a concern, obviously, that if things start to run away from us as a country, where you have these, and again, it's social media, accelerated by social media. It's not necessarily the cause, but accelerated by social media. That you have these images, it instills fear, and that's not how we want to. That's not how we want this country to be. Nobody wants that country to be, whether you're on the left or the right, where you have this fear of just doing something simple like going to a fairground.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really complicated, and I want to see proper leadership now in this country. I don't think Keir Starmer walking along in his shirt and tie with his flowers yesterday was that leadership at all. I imagine they must be very conflicted now, Labour Party, of how to handle this situation. Yeah. How do they handle this against their values?
Well, they need to get a grip with it, and quick.
Theo, always good to see you. Thank you so much. Right, don't go anywhere. This is Britain's Newsroom. Annie has your latest, hopefully very nice weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Another hot day today, but as the humidity rises, so does the thunderstorm risk across southern areas. But for most of us, it's going to be a dry, warm and sunny day. I think the sunshine will be more widely felt across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland into this afternoon. There will still be some hazier sunshine here and there, but I think for most of us, a dry and warm day. But across the south coast, notice these showers starting to edge ever closer to the south coast. There is some uncertainty in whether we'll see any impacts from that, but there is a warning in force. Now, away from that thunderstorm risk, temperatures still climbing into the high 20s, the low 30s still possible. We could see 32 degrees again today, but into this evening it will stay quite warm, even across parts of Scotland where it has been a bit of a cooler week so far. It's eastern areas of Scotland that will be warmest. In the west, with still a little bit more in the way of cloud around, temperatures in the mid-teens here this evening. To Northern Ireland, potentially some hazy sunshine, some clouds still lingering across parts of Wales, but as I said, it's across the south coast where temperatures are the highest, still in the mid to high 20s to end this evening, where the humidity's rising and that thunderstorm risk does increase. So that's where the weather warnings in force across southeastern areas of England through this afternoon and into the evening. But overnight, that risk becomes more widespread across parts of England and Wales. Parts of South Wales and then northeastern England could see some heavy downpours, large hail and lightning as well overnight. And temperatures will be high. It's going to be a warm and potentially quite muggy night tonight quite widely. So a warm start to the day on Thursday. Some sunshine across the north and west, but in the east still a risk of some very heavy downpours. A continued risk of thunderstorms and hail into Thursday afternoon as well. As that area clears away to the east, it's from the west we start to see more in the way of showers, thunderstorms as well, and it will be another very warm and humid feeling day. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News. The latest GB News travel.
Good morning, I'm Russell Holding. On the M80 in Stirling, the northbound exit at junction 9 at Bannockburn remains closed for repairs. On the M8 in Glasgow, there's a lane closed westbound. There's been another accident between junctions 16 and 17 from Craighall to St George's Cross. There are queues from junction 12 at Cumbernauld Road. Tyne and Wear Metro services are suspended between Wallsend and North Shields because of a faulty train. On the M6 in Lancashire, the southbound exit at junction 31 near Preston's closed because of a fire at a nearby farm. On Merseyside, St Luke's Road in Southport remains closed for an investigation. In Derbyshire, the A617 is closed eastbound from Haslam to Temple Normanton after an accident causing delays to traffic heading through Chesterfield. On the M6 in the West Midlands, there's a lane closed northbound after a vehicle caught fire between junctions 5 and 6 towards Spaghetti Junction, Birmingham, causing delays. And in Norfolk, the A148 is closed each way north of Fakenham after an accident.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Celebrate a spectacular summer with your chance to win an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash in our Great British Giveaway. It's the biggest prize of the year so far, and it's totally tax-free. What would you spend that on? Luxury holidays, a new car, or just put it away for a rainy day? Whatever you do with £30,000 in tax-free cash, make sure you don't miss out on a chance to make it yours. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
As time passes,
She could have saved Storm.
you made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different. Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. It's 10 o'clock on Wednesday, the 31st of July, live across the United Kingdom. This is Britain's Newsroom with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
The 3 girls killed in the Southport stabbing attack, they've been named. Bibi King, age 6, Elsie Stankham, just 7, and Alice Aguirre, age 9.
And, of course, followed riots in Southport. Almost 40 officers were injured last night as protesters attacked the police outside a mosque.
And is it really now lawless Britain? Overnight, 6 people have been arrested after a machete fight. Believe it or not, in Southend-on-Sea, just a few yards from the local fun fair. Is Britain broken?
And as Labour scrap the European Scrutiny Committee, find out why Brexiteers are furious. Could we be moving a step closer to rejoining the EU? We're going to talk to Mark Francois in just a moment.
And Hugh Edwards in court, the former BBC presenter, has arrived at Westminster Magistrates today charged with making 37 indecent images of children.
This train terminates here. Oh wait, you're all too stupid to understand that. Let me try again. This train ends here.
That's right, some major railway services are dumbing down train tannoy announcements to make the language easier to understand. What do you think of that? Let us know what you think about that. Making it easier to understand. Is that because so many people here don't speak English, don't know what terminate means? I want my children to sit on the train and think, terminate, that's an interesting word. What does that mean? Yeah. Instead of saying, your train stops here. Let us know your
If it
thoughts.
starts at all, that is, your train.
That's a very good
More
point.
to the point.
gbnews.com/your say. First, though, the very latest news with Sophia Wensler.
Bev, Andrew, thank you. Good morning. It's 10 o'clock. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer has accused those involved in a riot in Southport last night of hijacking a peaceful vigil with violence and thuggery. He said they'd insulted the community as it grieves for 3 young girls who were killed in Monday's stabbing attack and warned they'd feel the full force of the law. It started when a group of around 300 people who'd gathered outside a mosque turned on police, throwing rocks larger than bricks and setting cars alight. Many were supporters of the English Defence League and were not from Southport. They'd been encouraged by posts on social media which falsely claimed the attacker was Muslim. Nearly 40 officers were injured and 27 were taken to hospital. Jenny Stancombe, whose daughter Elsie died in Monday's attack, pleaded on social media for the violence to end, saying the police have been nothing but heroic. They and we don't need this. One local resident told GB News some of the violence appeared to be coordinated.
It was all people from outside of town that were brought in buses and cars. They got changed when they got here into the streets, and then they started to riot with the police, set a police van on fire, and all hell broke loose.
We could see on social media this was being planned. There are far-right fascist groups just seized the opportunity, seized on misinformation on the internet to mobilise and spread their hateful agenda.
In other news, Hamas's top political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, has been killed during an attack on the Iranian capital. The terror group is publicly blaming Israel for the attack. Israel hasn't commented yet, but has previously vowed to eliminate Hamas's leaders. The US says it's working to ease tensions, but confirmed it would help defend Israel if it were attacked. The strike on Tehran comes hours after Israel killed a senior Hezbollah commander in the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Israeli officials say he was behind Saturday's rocket attack on the Golan Heights, which killed 12 people, mostly children. The strikes have immediately raised fears of further escalation, with Qatar warning it undermines the chances of peace and the region risks slipping into chaos. Former BBC presenter Hugh Edwards has arrived in court a short time ago, charged with making indecent images of children. The 62-year-old is alleged to have committed the 3 offences dating back to 2020. The veteran broadcaster is accused of having photographs on WhatsApp, including 6 of the most serious type. Angela Rayner is playing down suggestions of a backlash against the government's house-building drive as she launches a new towns task force. The Deputy Prime Minister told MPs yesterday the government was restoring mandatory housing targets for local authorities after they were scrapped by the Conservatives. She's also appointed 2 experts to lead an effort to create communities of at least 10,000 homes each. Housing Minister Matthew Pennycock told GB News the government has its work cut out for them.
Inheritance we're picking up is absolutely dire. We're looking at new housing supply dipping under 200,000 homes a year, partly due to some of the changes the government made late last year, abolishing mandatory housing targets, which we reversed in the changes we made to national planning policy yesterday. So it's a 5-year target. It's stretching. We think it's achievable, partly because of those changes we made yesterday. But with this new towns task force bringing forward appropriate locations for large-scale new communities across the country, over and above that target that we've announced on local authorities across England to bring forward 370,000.
In Paris, triathlons have been allowed to take place today after tests showed the River Seine is clean enough. It's after the men's event was cancelled yesterday over fears the famous river was too polluted. But World Triathlon says the water is much healthier today, which is good news for Team GB, with Beth Potter picking up a bronze medal in the women's triathlon this morning. And while the skies are a little gloomy in London this morning, heat warnings remain in place across the UK. Parts of England are forecasting 28 degrees today, which is expected to continue into Friday. But if you fancy a quick trip to the beach, you better be quick because thunderstorms are expected later in the week. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler, more in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good morning, welcome back to Britain's Newsroom, live across the UK on GB News.
So the Prime Minister has warned rioters in Southport they will feel what he says is the full force of the law after they hijacked that vigil for the knife attack victims.
So violent protests broke out last night as demonstrators clashed with police. This was outside of a mosque. 39 officers were injured, with some of them suffering fractures and concussion.
Of course, it follows the fatal stabbing at the Taylor Swift holiday clubs where 7-year-old Elsie Dot Stankham, Alice Aguirre, who was 9, and 6-year-old BB King were all murdered. And, of course, we've got 5 people still with critical injuries in hospital.
So we're joined now by former chairman of the Conservative Muslim Forum, Mohammed Amin. Good morning, Mohammed. So these riots last night were outside a mosque. That doesn't seem to be coincidental, but, of course, this appears to have been triggered by a mistake around the facts of this case, with an assumption, wrong, that the perpetrator who had been arrested, the alleged perpetrator, was of Muslim faith. Is that your understanding of why that location was chosen?
Good morning, Bev. My knowledge comes from the BBC, GB News, media. I've not been to Southport. I'm presently in Switzerland. What happened on Monday was absolutely horrifying, and I can understand people being incredibly upset, angry, you want somebody to blame. But attacking, if you think that the perpetrator was Muslim, and at the moment we have no reason to believe that he was, I just don't know, he may well be Muslim. But attacking other Muslims is not the way. My city, Manchester, in 2017, saw 22 people killed by somebody who was a Muslim, who was a terrorist. The city came together because we recognized that this was a terrorist. He was motivated by an ideology. Other Muslims were not to blame for what he did. And what happened in Southport, this riot last night, is absolutely appalling. It appears that many of these people were actually not from Southport itself. This wasn't the community turning on itself. It was troublemakers from outside coming in to basically have a punch-up.
We saw what happened, unacceptable, we all know that, Mohammed. Is there something the Muslim community can do to ensure that there is perhaps there is a perception that integration is not always working? Some people feel that they know it's no longer their town, their city. There's a sense of alienation. I'm in no way trying to justify or excuse the shocking scenes of violence last night. Shocking and unacceptable. And we've already heard from one of the mums of the little girls who died saying, "Not in our name, please." But is there something Muslim community leaders can do, do you think?
Andrew, first of all, you're right. There is a perception, quite wrong, that integration isn't working. Integration, actually, in Britain is incredibly successful, far more successful than any other country in Europe. There is something that Muslims can do, should do, and indeed are doing. So, for example, speaking personally, I regularly speak to schools for a charity called Speakers for Schools. And one topic I'm often asked to talk about is the relationship between Christianity and Islam. A few years ago, the Muslim Council of Britain launched the Open My Mosque initiative, where we see around the country more and more mosques on a particular day in the year going out of their way to invite people to come in. And people are welcome to visit mosques 365 days a year, but on one day a year, there's a special effort made to get people to come in and learn what Muslims do believe, rather than going by incorrect social media narratives.
I would suggest, though, that there are people who feel that they see in their day-to-day lives, and it may not be anybody that lives in the Westminster bubble, but they see in their day-to-day lives that there are Muslims who get priority. I'm thinking about the workplace in Ramadan. I've spoken to people who aren't Muslim who are resentful that during Ramadan, when their colleagues are fasting, they don't have the same responsibilities to do the heavy lifting, let's say, quite literally in some cases. People are distressed, I would say, or nervous by huge public spaces being taken over during Islamic festivals. And you've got the case of the Batley Grammar School teacher still in hiding. We've got stories about halal meat only being served in schools. These cases, these individual cases, are building up, Mohammed, to have some people, not everybody, but some people feeling, looking left and right and going, I don't know where, as a non-Muslim, I fit in this country anymore.
Bev, you give me an incredibly long list. The big picture message is very simple. Islam is the world's second largest religion. There are about 2.5 billion Christians in the world and about 1.8 billion Muslims. And with every year that goes by, the UK is looking more like the rest of the world, which is quite normal. That's happening everywhere else in the world as people move around. And Islam is the second largest religion in our country. It's still not very big. There are about 6.5% of the British population who are Muslims, and about 40%, 45% are Christians. The number of Christians keeps going down because more and more are becoming atheists. The country is changing, but I don't think this is a change for the worse in any shape or form.
OK.
All right, that's Mohammed Amin, who is a former head of the Conservative Muslim Forum. We've got in the studio with us tonight to say Mark Francois, who is a Conservative MP who survived the coal and is an Essex MP. Your Rayleigh constituency, Mark, is next door to Southend, where we saw the completely shocking scenes of young men wielding large, three-foot-long machete blades at each other, broad daylight, near a fairground, near the fun park, where children will be playing. Unacceptable on the streets of any town, but it seems even more shocking in Southend, where you and I know a great man was called David Amos. Sir David Amos, who was a Southend Tory MP who was murdered by a Muslim fanatic.
With a bladed weapon.
With a bladed weapon.
No, I mean, the irony of that is not lost on me, and I still miss David tremendously, to be honest. We all do. My understanding of what happened is that Essex police cordoned that area off quite quickly. They issued what's called a Section 60 order, which gave them power to do that and enhanced powers of stop and search. And as I think you said earlier, once they'd isolated those individuals, 6 of them were arrested. So it's not like they got to do that and then disappeared off scot-free. They were nicked.
Yeah.
But it's still a shame that it took a while to do that. But I think it's fair to say, the Chief Constable of Essex, Ben Julian Harrington's a former paratrooper, right? So once the police realised what was happening, they did take fairly decisive action, and 6 people have been arrested, and I hope you throw the book at them.
Shocking that our police have to put themselves in the line of danger with these fanatics with machetes. One of those police officers could be dying or have really serious injuries as a result.
Yes. I don't know any of the details, and if there's been an arrest, there'll be a court case, so legally we have to be careful.
Of course.
It might be that was all gang-related.
It's just the collapse of social fabric, isn't it, from everything from schools, education, respect, knives, crime. It's a massive issue, Mark. We're looking at the footage here. This was Southend-on-Sea last night.
Terrible.
Mark, we want to talk
to you. My point is, when that happened, it should not have happened. No. But when it did happen, the police did respond to it fairly robustly.
We want to talk to you about the European Scrutiny Committee being disbanded.
So I was in the Commons yesterday afternoon, Mark, last day of term. I couldn't believe my ears when Labour MPs came up to me and said, you do know the European Scrutiny Committee is being abolished without a vote by 6 o'clock tonight, last day of term. Just explain what that committee does, Mark, why it's so important, bearing in mind we've got a Labour government that is determined to take us much closer to the European Union.
Right, for the record, I said in the House of Commons yesterday that it was a bad mistake to abolish the committee. The European Scrutiny Committee was established decades ago to examine in detail the raft of EU legislation by which we could be legally bound. So it was a committee of experts with expert clerks supporting it, chaired very ably for many years by Sir Bill Cash, who knew his onions.
He did.
And they would go through this stuff, line by line. And Labour would argue, well, now that we've left the EU, we don't have to worry about that. But that's not correct, because Labour have made plain that they intend to mirror much future EU legislation. In which case, if we're going to make our law mirror that EU law, even though we've left the EU following a democratic referendum, it's very important to have a body of experts in Parliament who can scrutinise that if it's going to become our law. And they've just abolished the committee whose specific remit was to do precisely that.
Isn't that an outrage? Without a vote in the Commons?
Yeah, they deliberately put it at the last minute on the order paper on the final day when it was a one-line whip day and many MPs had already returned to their constituencies. It was completely deliberate. And it's symptomatic of what I think Labour will do, which comes to your wider point. Look, I sat in the Commons night after night for 3 years and watched Sir Keir Starmer colluding with MPs from all parties to try and keep us in the EU at any cost. Starmer remains a Remainer.
Mark, I have to interrupt you just for some breaking news.
Oh, sorry.
Apologies, don't go anywhere. This is the news that former BBC presenter Hugh Edwards has pleaded guilty at Westminster Magistrates Court to 3 counts of making indecent images of children. Mark, carry on.
Right, so just to pick up where I left off. So, you know, night after night, Starmer collaborated with people from all parties, including my own, to try and keep us in the EU at any cost. So here's what I think...
Second referendum he wanted?
Night after night. You know, I even wrote a book about it called Spartan Victory. It's still available on Amazon. and so here's what I think they're going to do. They're not going to risk another referendum because, remember, until the last minute, the polls said that Remain was going to win, and then, mercifully, it didn't. It'll be grandmother's footsteps. So at some point, they'll say, oh, you know, economic conditions are tough. Maybe we should consider rejoining the single market. Then if they get away with that, they'll say, well, there might be some advantages to being back in the customs union, even though it means we can no longer have an independent trade policy. And then if they get that far, they'll say, well, we're virtually back in, we might as well go the whole hog and rejoin it.
Well, it'll be done. Free movement of people. If we go in the single market, we get free movement of people again.
Yes, and after all of the arguments about migration during the general election, you know, and I got that on the doorstep like lots of other people, if you go into the single market, free movement is fundamental. So I think what Labour will do is they will try and do this incrementally, step by step, and one part of that is to get rid of the committee of experts who are there to keep an eye on you.
And I was talking to a Labour MP about it, Stella Creasy, who is a Remainer, she's not on our side of the argument, who was appalled.
Well, if it's not to betray her confidence, I spoke to Stella earlier in the day. She was appalled. And I actually intervened on her during the debate in order to get on the record that I thought it was a bad
She actually came on GB News and said why she thought the Labour government was behaving undemocratically.
Yeah, now, you know, so she's, you know, an ardent, passionate pro-European. I'm an ardent, passionate Brexiteer, so, you know, we're kind of at either end of the spectrum, you might say, ideologically on that. But we both felt that this was a mistake, so that tells you something.
And it's taking power away from MPs and giving more power to this overmighty executive with a majority of 172.
Yeah, so, I mean, we're already starting to see, you know, the new Labour programme roll out. Mandatory housing targets, Angela Rayner announced those in the Commons. So what that does is you pick...
They're going to be in your constituency, leafy green Rayleigh.
It will set town against town, village against village, community against community. I've been an MP for nearly a quarter of a century, Andrew. One thing I've learned about development is you can do it successfully, but you have to do it with people and not to people. This is doing it to people, and the targets will be so high they'll be completely unrealistic. It's a recipe for disaster.
OK,
I'm with you.
Thank you, Mark.
Always good to talk to you.
There. Right, up next, we're going to celebrate, thank goodness, a change of mood. We're going to celebrate Team GB's success at the Olympics. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Meghan Markle is threatening to support Kamala Harris, and I reckon that would be the kiss of death for her bid as a president.
Well, look, Meghan has a relationship, a friendly relationship with Kamala Harris. I firmly believe that Meghan Markle will endorse Kamala Harris for president. This story is circulating because Newsweek actually took a poll asking how many people would be influenced by a potential endorsement from the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. 40% said they would be influenced. 21 said they would vote for someone Harry and Meghan has suggested. And then 20 said that they would not vote for who Harry and Meghan suggested. I think that Meghan wants to be involved. Meghan wants to be included. This is potentially a very historic election. We really saw Meghan involved, including with Kamala Harris, some voter campaigns in 2020. And I think this is a great way for Meghan Markle to get her foot in the door. Her father, Thomas Markle, has said that she's always had political aspirations. And what better way than to be somehow involved, inserting your name in the headline with a presidential campaign like this?
Do you get the vibes, do you get the sense that she is a political animal?
I don't feel like she has tough enough skin, but I do believe that this is important to her. During that speech for the UN, she talked about writing First Lady Hillary Clinton. We saw her in 2020 work with Stacey Abrams, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, and Michelle Obama to do campaigns for women voting, getting women to the polls.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark Meets and My Take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring. Not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
10:23, this is Britain's Newsroom with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
So the former BBC presenter Hugh Edwards, well, doyen of the BBC, wasn't he, for decades, has pleaded guilty at Westminster Magistrates Court to 3 counts of making indecent images of children.
That's right, the 62-year-old arrived at Westminster Magistrates just after 9 o'clock this morning for his first court appearance since being charged on the 26th of June.
He had dozens of photographs on WhatsApp, including 7 of the most serious paedophilic types. He could receive a maximum penalty of up to 10 years in jail.
Right, our panel are here, Stephen Pound and Mike Parry. So good to see you, gentlemen, this morning.
Better to see you two, if I may say.
Oh,
well, speak for yourself, please, Steve, if you don't mind. You know. Can we stop scrapping just for a minute? Can we 4 minutes of peace before we start duking it? Okay.
Talk about the Olympics. Do you want to talk about the Olympics, Mike Parry?
I'm a bit Olympicked out, if you don't, if you know what I mean.
What?
Listen, I love France. I love going to France and all that. But I think insane. The French are very arrogant towards us. So I'm not exactly schadenfreude in the fact that lots of things are going wrong with the Olympics. Wrong language, Mike. Including... oh, thank you very much. Including the fact that the River Seine is unsuitable for Olympic sport.
And Macron was going to go in it.
Yes.
To prove how safe it was, and Kylo's his own.
Yes.
And yet the poor hapless mayor,
that's right.
she did go in.
Yes, they put her in, but they wouldn't put her head underwater, and we all know why.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, didn't they do the women's triathlon in there this morning? They did the women's triathlon, didn't they?
And you watch how sick they'll be in the next few years, and not just they might not have won the gold.
We got a bronze medal in that.
Madame Hidalgo, the mayor, actually dived in, and of course the sports minister, then she went in the week before, and she's actually been outed for sort of snogging President Macron. Have you seen the picture? She's got a hand around the back of his head.
But she's kissing the back of his neck. What sort of sexual thing is that?
I don't know. I'm a fairly innocent West London lad. I mean, I'm not familiar with these.
It doesn't take Stephen Pound long, does it?
It doesn't take, no.
But I say,
Howard.
As they say about political romances in France, 3 minutes, including the shower.
Douze compris. I mean, it is a bit bizarre. I thought that the French's great specialities were refusing to speak any language other than French and shrugging.
Right.
Then talking
called a Gallic shrug.
Talking about language, we are doing something here that they would just simply not do in France because they believe in the value of their language. They prize their French language. They even have an institute, don't they, to make sure that it isn't anglicised.
Well, didn't Sarkozy start an international TV station speaking only in French because he thought people loved it?
However, on our trains, we're ditching complicated English words in case people don't understand them.
Like cancelled.
Harry.
Well, can I just say one thing? Every single French embassy and consulate everywhere in the world has two people who are diplomatic experts. And they came to us in '97 when we all came into Parliament and said, you know, we are from the French Cultural Embassy. We would like to teach you conversational French.
That's nice.
So we sort of the first person who went was Baron Trixie, who was an Australian dentist in the House of Lords, who spoke with a very strong Australian accent. And the other chap was a bloke from the Newcastle who spoke with a kind of accent like this. And the three of us had actually had French conversational lessons in sort of my, sort of fairly middle-class West London accent, a thick Geordie accent and a totally Australian accent. And this is Baroness Trixie Gardner of Parks.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember her?
She was a spy once.
Anyway, suddenly, after the first three lessons, the guy from the French embassy said, "Oh, ce n'est pas possible. C'est un accent excroyable." And
whose accent was that?
And all three of us.
But is this the right thing to do, Mike?
What's that?
Simplify the language on trains. It's so that people who don't speak English can understand. Tony Mayo, the Plain English campaign, said getting rid of words.
So where'd you stop?
So instead of saying the train
would
terminates...
make it easier for passengers who have English as their second language.
Yeah, but look, this is about tradition in England. This is 1950s England. This is when we had steam trains, and when you got to where you were going, the guard would walk up and down with the flag on the platform saying, "End of the line," or "The train terminates here," or "All change." Do you know, even today, on the line you use, the Elizabeth line, they actually say "All change" when the train gets to Paddington, right? Nice. And the point is, the train's got to go somewhere else when you get off. So I've never understood this all change thing.
What I get so cross about, Mike, saying we no longer want to say the train terminates here, it's going to say the train ends its journey.
That's right.
What people actually want is the trains to operate on
Yes, I agree. I totally agree.
And to be able to get a seat.
I totally agree.
And maybe even be able to buy a cup of tea.
Do you think somebody on an Avanti train that's been delayed for 2 hours breaks down halfway to Manchester and eventually gets there 3 hours late? Is that worried what they're going to be told when they eventually get to Manchester? End of the line, get off the train or whatever.
The problem we've got here is
burning.
Well, we had a situation like this in the health service years ago where they had to start having bilingual messages up on the walls. And so we originally did it in I can't remember what it was, Arabic and English and French, and then we had Swahili, Romanian, Polish, and it's insane. You then get this massive, great long list of names. So if you're going to actually try to include people by using language that's accessible, where do you stop? Because there are some people who do not speak. It doesn't matter if you're saying terminates, ends, blows up, or goes off the settled Carlisle viaduct. If you can't understand the language,
but Stephen, you're talking about catering for people who speak other language than English. We're talking here about messing around with great English expressions that we've had for decades, and people think they're old-fashioned, therefore they're not good.
I know it sounds silly, but we wonder why people take to the streets and riot over what they see as a lack of kind of Britishness.
Yes.
When our language is
loss.
we just struggle. We change it to accommodate people who don't speak English. That's why the streets are ablaze. This sort of thing.
People feel a sense of loss.
They do.
And to call it nostalgia, or to call it, sort of some sort of right-wing thing, it absolutely demeans it. You have to take this seriously, because people genuinely feel as though something has gone from their lives. And it's not just sort of black and white television looking back. It's actually something fundamental. It's about what makes this nation, what makes this nation a nation for all the people. Because it cannot be a good country for anyone to live in unless it's a good country for everyone to live in.
I agree.
That's the problem we have at the moment.
And I tell you where it's going.
People actually feel out of sync with their own country. There's a real job to be done. And to be fair, GBNews actually does a pretty good job of actually bringing people in. The diversity, but also the standards. You can have diversity, but you've got to have standards. You can actually integrate, but you don't assimilate.
I totally agree. And to take that to the limit you're talking about, a mate of mine had a very big house in the West West Midlands, suddenly decided to sell up, pack up and move to the Cotswolds.
Lovely.
And I said, why are you moving to the Cotswolds? He said, the Cotswolds is the only part of my country now which I regard as so thoroughly English, I want to spend the rest of my life there.
Yeah.
And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, every other area of my life has been infiltrated by things which I don't appreciate, which I don't think are terribly English, which I wasn't brought up with.
He's feeling alienated in his own community.
And he's decided to move to somewhere where he says there's a last bastion of what I regard as great English values.
And it's happening.
And you look out of trains and you see all these lovely rolling green countryside. And Angela Rayner tells us yesterday, you think we're building on the ground. Don't worry about it. I do worry about it. I worry a lot that they're going to build all over our green countryside.
Of course, I do as well.
Forever English, forever Welsh, you know. There's all these brownfield sites they can develop, but they're not calling it grey belt.
No, I totally agree. They regard a meadow as something which only rich people use, whereas, of course, some of the lowest standards of living in this country are in country villages. Rural areas. They have duck ponds and they have the village green, but to a certain, cachet of politicians in this country, that's elitist.
Look, Mike, you're going back to sort of John Major with the old maids cycling to communion in the mist. Look, the reality is one of the reasons why we have rural poverty is because we have no rural housing. People cannot afford to live in those villages in Sussex and Kent and in the Cotswolds, which is why we have to have housing to enable people who are from those areas to live there, rather than having to move to Milton Keynes or Luton.
And I agree. It's going to be ugly housing, according to their own report.
No,
we don't. Well, let's hope not. Let's hope not. Right, listen, we've got to move on, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Sophia Wensler's waiting very patiently with your news.
Oh, sorry.
Bev, thank you. It's 10:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer has accused those involved in a riot in Southport last night of hijacking a peaceful vigil with violence and thuggery. He said they'd insulted the community as it grieves for 3 young girls who were killed in Monday's stabbing attack, and warned they'd feel the full force of the law. It started when a group of around 300 people who'd gathered outside a mosque turned on police, throwing rocks larger than bricks and setting cars alight. Many were supporters of the English Defence League and were not from Southport. They'd been encouraged by false posts on social media, which claimed the attacker was Muslim. Nearly 40 officers were injured and 27 were taken to hospital. Jenny Stancoombe, whose daughter Elsie died in Monday's attack, pleaded on social media for the violence to end, saying the police have been nothing but heroic. They and we don't need this. Former BBC presenter Hugh Edwards has pleaded guilty at Westminster Magistrates Court to 3 counts of making indecent images of children. The 62-year-old admitted having images on WhatsApp, including 7 of the most serious type, in offences dating back to 2020. Hamas's top political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, has been killed during an attack on the Iranian capital. The terror group is publicly blaming Israel for the attack. Israel hasn't commented yet, but has previously vowed to eliminate Hamas's leaders. The strike comes hours after Israel killed a senior Hezbollah commander in the Lebanese capital of Beirut. The attacks immediately raised fears of further escalation, with Qatar warning that it undermines the chances of peace and the region risks slipping into chaos. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler, more in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
We're going to go to Mark White soon, who is at the court, where the breaking news that we heard earlier that Hugh Edwards has pleaded guilty to accusations of possessing pornography, child pornography. Let's see what you have been saying here to us this morning. We've been talking about the fact that the train lines are going to change their language to make it easier to understand, losing the word terminate. Apparently people don't know what terminate means.
God help us.
If anyone comes to live here, says Jack, they must be forced to speak English. No translators should be provided. If immigrants can't speak English well enough, they will need to provide their own translator or family member to help them. This should not be a burden on the taxpayer. How much nationally is spent from the public purse on translators?
And if you go into any inner London hospital, the walls are filled with pages of different translations.
Can I just say, no, it is a mandatory requirement for British citizenship to speak English.
Yeah.
I mean, I do the British citizenship ceremonies in my own borough. They have to do them in English. You cannot actually get British citizenship unless you can speak English.
And if they fail because they can't speak English, are they deported?
No, they just get knocked back.
Right. And then so they don't have to. I mean, does it make any difference?
Of course it does. It makes a huge difference, because if you don't get British citizenship, you can't actually then have permanent residence in the country. You're not entitled to public funds. It makes a massive difference.
Is it a decent level of English?
Well, let me tell you, it often happens with the cases that I used to deal with, people whose grandmothers are speaking Silheti or they're speaking Urdu or something, and they say, oh, Granny, she's too old to learn another language. Well, the problem, you've got to actually be quite hard about this. She may be too old to speak another language, in which case she's too old to be uprooted from homeland to come across to the UK. You have to have the language. So can I just assure your correspondent that they do actually have to... You did touch on a point, though, to what standard. It has to be passable standard so that you can respond to emergency instructions if necessary.
And if they're too old to learn a language, the chances are that very soon these old grannies...
Burden on the health service.
Burden on the NHS very, very quickly, Stephen, having not paid into it.
Slightly worries me when you and I are agreeing.
Well, but this is all part of the resentment, isn't it? That there's huge resentment out there about the way inward migration has not been properly managed. And it's causing huge resentment.
Yeah, and I don't think any government's done it.
Well, they've all ignored it. Housing's the biggest problem. We just talked about housing a few minutes ago. If you know, the reason there's no houses available for people who you could call indigenous British population is because a lot of them are now needed for people who've come to live in this country.
When Angela Rayner stood on her feet and made that long speech about how she's going to bring in, let's say, ugly housing, 1.7 million houses a year, I don't think I heard her say, because we're going to have to cope with all the huge influx on migration, which the Labour government was triggered, first of all, under Blair.
Absolutely.
No concession, no admission.
I totally agree.
It's a massive reason why we don't have enough houses.
Agree. Tony Blair, what did he say? 50,000 people will come from Eastern Europe. Yeah, 50,000.
There's nobody came from Eastern Europe. What did he do? He let
Poland. I'm talking about people
Poland's
coming
not in
from
Eastern
Poland.
Europe. Poland's in the heart of Europe. Russia is Eastern Europe.
It's regarded as Eastern Europe because it's part of the Soviet Union.
That was
still was.
I mean, when the new states came in, absolutely.
No, I remember exactly right.
It was told to have transitional arrangements, limiting the numbers could come in. That's what other countries.
It was the period of EU enlargement.
Used to do it.
It was the period of EU enlargement, and the United Kingdom was one of 3 countries which didn't actually enforce that.
And we were the ones that were flooded with most migrants.
Well, Ireland was one of the others, and they didn't. But look, the thing about the Royal...
but Ireland loved the Europeans because the Europeans give them hundreds of millions of pounds.
Well, the thing that Mike just said about, you know, about people taking over housing. You're talking about these rural villages that we were describing earlier on. You mentioned, you know, lyrically describing the duck ponds and all that business. They aren't full of immigrants. You don't. When you go to somewhere in the Cotswolds, you don't find, you know, halal
that's
butchers.
That's why his mate's gone there.
That's
why his mate's gone to the Cotswolds, because he doesn't want to find a halal butcher in Stowe on the Wold High Street.
Incidentally, if anybody is in Stowe on the Wold High Street at the present time, trying to get a halal sausage, I mean,
but I never said about housing being in rural locations. What I'm saying is people want to protect the sort of lifestyle they had when they were being brought up in those villages, and they fear that it's being invaded.
Look, the loss of housing, loss of rural housing, is almost entirely due to either second homes or the increase in house prices actually forcing out the children of, to use your word, the indigenous population. If you go to Cornwall, you go to the villages, you go to the Isle of Wight, you'll see that over and over again. The people cannot afford to live there. I mean, Cornwall is the perfect example. If you think how many people from Cornwall then have to move to Bristol or to Bath or to Plymouth because they cannot afford to live. That's a problem we've got to face. And it's not a problem of immigration, it's a problem of a lack of housing.
You're not saying immigration is not a problem. Not the problem with housing. Come on, Stephen, where have you been?
In this country for many, many years.
Well, then you know that immigration is a massive factor in why we don't have enough houses.
It's got to be. If the population's gone up 6 million in the last decade, then it's got to be.
Sorry, there's too many people who've got two homes, and there's too many people who actually...
What do you mean, too many people have got 2 homes? Why can't I have a second home? Does that make me a bad person? Because I've worked all my life? You see, politics of envy. Politics of envy again.
True face of Labour slip there.
Right, our Home and Security Editor Mark White. He's outside Westminster Magistrates Court. Mark.
Guilty plea from Hugh Edwards inside Westminster Magistrates Court, marking what is a spectacular fall from grace for the BBC's most senior newsreader, one of the BBC's highest paid presenters, who of course has now left the corporation. He has pleaded guilty to indecent image offences of children that relate to 41 separate indecent images relating to one child as young as 7, other children up to the age of 15. He arrived here this morning just after 9 a.m, decided to front it up basically. A lot of people just arrive right at the front door in a taxi and shoot straight in to court, but he walked right up from a street just round the corner from here, and that allowed the many members of the media who are here, the photographers, the camera crews, to film him all the way in as he was wearing a dark suit, sunglasses, coming in here to Westminster Court to face those charges. And of course, what quite often happens is there's no plea entered, or they plead not guilty and it goes up to another court, often the Crown Court, given the severity of the charges. But now that he has pleaded guilty to these offences, the judge has asked for background reports, sentencing reports, and he is to appear back here at Westminster Magistrates Court on the 17th of September, on the 18th of September. Sorry, someone's shouting to me, but I can't actually hear. 16th of September. So he'll appear back here then. That will be a pre-sentencing hearing to decide what they do with Hugh Edwards, because it is possible he could face a significant jail term, or he could face a jail term as low as 12 months. It could be suspended, so it could be open to the magistrate here at Westminster Magistrates Court to decide to deal with it here rather than refer it up to the Crown Court. But we won't know that until the 16th of December and that next court appearance by Hugh Edwards. What I should say is happening at the moment, and I'm just going to pop out of the way and allow Joe, our cameraman, just to give you a flavour of all the press that are here and clearly waiting for Hugh Edwards to come out. But he is now currently meeting with a probation officer inside the court before then leaving the court, and they'll decide at that point how he exits this building, but it may well be similar to how he entered it. He's going to have to come out here, possibly straight into a taxi or around the corner again. You can expect that it will continue to be a very significant, what they call a press bun fight, as it was when he came in here with many dozens of photographers and camera crews and reporters following him into court. So Hugh Edwards, a surprise to me, and I think many people in the court, deciding at this early stage to plead guilty to those offences of making indecent images. We should explain this as well. The prosecution clarified that making indecent images doesn't necessarily mean the act of making indecent images, but it can be just opening apps, effectively downloading images, and that is indeed what the defence team have been saying here, that Hugh Edwards was not actually making, in the traditional sense of the word, indecent images, but he was opening apps, and of course some of those apps related to some very young children, and some of the images related to children that were up to the age of 15. Serious offence, there is no doubt about that, but in pleading guilty to all of these images relating to 41 separate images, then there will be a deduction on whatever the eventual sentence for Hugh Edwards is. And of course, the judge will also take into account other issues such as his previously good character, other issues such as potentially his mental health issues that we've heard an awful lot about, that led, of course, to his departure from the BBC following those allegations last year. And one other thing to add, the offences that he has now pleaded guilty today do not relate to the allegations that were so publicly aired last year that led to Hugh Edwards being suspended, then suffering, we're told, that mental health episode, and then subsequently leaving the BBC. So you're looking at these live images outside of Westminster Magistrates Court as we await the departure of a man who was once the BBC's most senior news presenter, covered all of these big state occasions, announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, presided and presented over her funeral, and many other state occasions over the years. Hugh Edwards was responsible for front and centre of the BBC's coverage, no longer now, as he's left the BBC and has pleaded guilty to these serious sexual offences, which of course could potentially carry a jail term.
Thank you, Mark. Mark White there. We will go back to Mark when Hugh Edwards leaves the court. Don't go anywhere. Let's see what you've been saying at home. Have you got you've not got the emails up, have you?
I don't know how to read the emails, you know. I'm computer illiterate.
I'll sit here like your secretary,
I have to admit it.
Right, let's see what you've been saying at home. Let's have a look now. Sorry, hold the line, caller. I should say it in a simple language, so like a trainer now.
Just don't terminate the conversation.
Your call is important to us.
Your call is important to us. Your presence is important to us.
Yeah.
John has said, why is nobody concerned about a certain religion taking over this country he's obviously talking about Islam, bowing to them regarding Merry Christmas on cards, our children's nativity plays, and it feels like they could be taking over. Under a Labour government, 3,000 have come into the country since they got the power. You haven't mentioned it. That's the small boats.
And actually, we mentioned it yesterday because it was an exclusive revealed on GB News by Mark White, who's actually at court today with Hugh Edwards. 3,000 have crossed on small boats since Labour came to power. But don't worry, they're going to smash the gangs. Remember? They're going to smash the gangs. They just haven't smashed any yet, because apparently it's quite easy to do it.
See, and Deirdre has said, morning Deirdre, she said perhaps if they stop paying out £8 million a day for illegal migrants, they could afford to keep the winter fuel payments for pensioners. Now, this was the news we learnt yesterday, wasn't it, Mike, about losing this pensioners' winter fuel payment unless you claim pensioner credit.
Yeah, which a lot of old pensioners don't know how to do because they're not...
want to.
Well, either A, they don't want to because they're too proud, or B, they simply don't know how to get around the paperwork on a laptop.
Which will be pages.
To do it. Exactly. I think I'm just amazed there's another huge, well of anger creeping up that we're taking money off the most vulnerable in our society who can't heat their homes in the winter and giving it to so-called junior doctors, some who earn £60,000 or £70,000 a year.
No, such as 96,000.
I agree.
And one of the junior doctors' leaders is in the papers today saying next year will be the next window of opportunity for industrial action when the honeymoon of this Labour government has gone.
Yes.
So West Streeting has paid them 22% pay rise over 2 years to stop the strikes, and next year they could be back at the door. We want more.
And 2/3 of the public sector are still waiting to see how this pans out before they put in their claims, and they're going to be the same. By the way, where's Streeting, the health minister, health secretary? He said 35% is completely unacceptable. Won't get anywhere near it. He's given them 22% over 2 years. So over 3 years, that would have been 35%.
Now, we got to go from you two elite athletes here to another one, because this is a gentleman who's running from Athens to London. Well, that's the challenge that Jack Cooper is facing. He's in the middle. He's running 3,000 kilometres to raise funds for men's mental health after struggling with depression himself. Here he is. Let's speak to Jack now.
Can we do it in miles, please?
It's Forrest Gump.
Good morning,
Hello,
Jack.
guys.
You're having a break.
Yes, taking a little rest day, just 20 or 30k today.
Listen, Andrew just said, can you say it in miles, please? How long is 3,000 kilometres in miles for the dinosaurs at this desk?
It's about 2,000 miles.
Amazing. And so tell us exactly what you're doing, Jack, and why.
So, like you said, the challenge did start off as Athens to London. It has now since changed slightly. So I'm overall running about just under 2,000 kilometres. Again, I'm not entirely sure that is in miles, from Vienna to London to raise money and awareness for Movember, a charity that helps support men's mental health.
That's Mo from Moustache in November. Do you normally have a moustache, Jack, or is that part of the branding?
It's part of the branding, but to be honest, I've grown to like it quite a lot. Usually rock the beard, but seeing as I'm running for November, yeah, I thought I'd get the tash going for this challenge.
Jack, how experienced are you at long-distance running? Because this is an extraordinary thing you're doing.
I mean, I've been running for 2 or 3 years now.
That's it.
Last November, I ran 500 kilometres in a month, which is just under a half marathon every day. Right. And that obviously, it was a lot of long distance training. And then this is like really up the stakes, really, to about 50, 60K every day.
And what you'd like the message to get across, Jack, correct me if I'm wrong, is this idea that people who are struggling with their mood, their depression or mental health or motivation, sport and actually just getting out with your trainers on is a way to help.
Absolutely, yeah. In my Movember story that I recently had on their website, I said that nothing changes, nothing changes. You've got to find an outlet or something to really change your direction when you're in a low period, and exercise is a great way of doing that. It boosts your mood, you feel better about yourself afterwards, and it just gives you a bit of momentum and prepares you for when things do get tough. Yeah, I've always found that exercise helps me massively with my mental health.
About how you fortify yourself each day, what are you eating and drinking?
I have to say my diet out here isn't amazing because being on the road doesn't provide you with the luxury of home-cooked meals. I'm having a lot of sort of meal replacement shakes, and the main thing I need is just lots of carbs. That's bananas, biscuits, sweets. Honestly, I'm just looking forward to a home-cooked meal when I'm back because vegetables and fruits are slightly limited out here.
We've got to go. We wish you all the best. We're going back live to Mark White, where Hugh Edwards is leaving the court. Mark.
He's leaving Westminster Magistrates Court. This is an extraordinary moment. He is one of our most famous broadcasters, the man who was trusted by the BBC to tell the world Her Majesty the Queen had died. Hugh Edwards leaving court. He has pleaded guilty to a number of counts of making indecent images of children. It's child pornography, paedophilia.
If you're listening on the radio, there are dozens of photographers. You don't see scenes like this anymore very often with paparazzi.
And I think it is, Bev, because he is a worldwide famous figure, because the image of him telling the world the Queen died went all around the world. Mark White is there for us from GB News. Mark White.
Yeah, I mean, just scenes of utter chaos as you would expect. I mean, so many camera crews and photographers and protesters and other members of the public that are here, and that's spilled right out onto the main road here, the main Marylebone Road, outside Westminster Magistrates Court. Hugh Edwards now getting into that vehicle to take him away from here, deciding, I think sensibly, or at least it may have been decided for him, not to do what he did when he came in this morning, which was to come on the long walk. There were just too many people there, and quite a few of the protesters shouting at him as well as he headed towards that vehicle. So that is Hugh Edwards now until the 16th of September, when he will be back here at Westminster Magistrates Court, having pleaded guilty to these images of making, or these charges of making indecent images. 41 separate images, 7 in the most serious category, Category A images, and they relate to one child as young as 7, other children right up to the age of 15. His defence team saying that he was not making images in the traditional sense, but rather opening attachments. But he has pleaded guilty to those offences. He could face a jail term. He has been asked to come back here where pre-sentencing reports are currently going to be carried out that will assess his previous offending behaviour or good behaviour, issues around his mental health, and of course the fact that he pleaded guilty at the very earliest opportunity, which is today. That will add to a discount on his sentence. So it's possible the judge may decide to send this up to the Crown Court if he feels a more significant sentence is in order. But if it's a sentence of 12 months or less, it will be dealt with here at Westminster Magistrates Court. So this man, 62 years old, known of course to people right up and down the country as the most senior BBC News presenter before leaving that corporation recently, has now left here and will be back on the 16th of September for those pre-sentencing reports.
And Mark, it's fascinating because I was curious about the sentencing because, of course, a Crown Court can impose a much larger sentence and he could be technically, I guess, sentenced to up to 10 years. What is the talk about a discount on the sentence? Is that because they will take into account the fact he's pleaded guilty? Should that make any difference to the length of sentence?
Well, it will do, yeah. I mean, the way in which the court system works, they incentivise an early plea because, of course, it shows an acknowledgement of a crime and contrition, but two, it saves an awful lot of time for the courts and saves potential victims the ordeal of testifying as well. So that's why they incentivise that with up to a third off for an early, very early guilty plea. So it remains to be seen just what the magistrate will decide to do with his sentencing options. As you quite rightly point out, Andrew, he could be facing a more significant sentence, but that will all depend on what those pre-sentencing reports come up with, what they tell the judge to inform his sentencing decision-making process going forward. So it might be that when we are back here again in September, that is the point where they just sentence Hugh Edwards at that point, or, as I say, it could go to either another hearing here or indeed the Crown Court, in which case we know then we're looking at a more serious sentence for this 62-year-old.
All right, that's Mark White at Westminster Magistrates Court. Mark, thanks for being with us. There'll be more on that throughout the programme. Astonishing.
Yeah, extraordinary scenes.
He must be one of the most famous broadcasters in the land.
Yeah. Right, listen,
and one of those respected.
Don't go anywhere. We've got a huge amount to get through between now and midday, but first, here is the weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Dry and sunny and warm for most of us. It's feeling increasingly humid over the next few days. That's going to increase the threat of thunderstorms for some areas. Low pressure's not too far away across the near continent. That's where that threat of thunderstorms is coming from. Further north, though, high pressure still dominating, so plenty of dry and warm weather. Quite a lot of sunshine as well. Still some hazier sunshine here and there across parts of northern England, some areas of Northern Ireland and the far north of Scotland still holding on to a bit of cloud and possibly some rain. But where we do see the long-lived sunshine across southern areas, temperatures will likely climb into the 30s once again this afternoon. But it's across the southeast where there's a risk of thunderstorms. There is some uncertainty in whether they will bring any impacts, but I think you will likely see some lightning offshore. Further north, though, no risk of thunderstorms across Scotland. It's likely to be a slightly warmer evening this evening than last night. It was quite a chilly night, actually, across Scotland compared to elsewhere in the country. So temperatures in the mid-teens, 20s for some areas of central southern Scotland, and some cloud around, but mainly a dry and pleasant evening for most of us. But there's still this threat of thunderstorms and a warning in force for the southeast throughout this afternoon and into this evening. But the threat really does increase overnight tonight as an area of thunderstorms develops across parts of Wales and across the southeast. And those will push north and eastwards overnight. So there's a wider area that's covered by this thunderstorm warning. We could see some localised impact due to flooding, lightning and some fairly large hail as well. And it's going to be a humid night for most of us. As I said, a milder night tonight across Scotland than last night as well. So potentially a pretty wet start to the day across some eastern areas of England, some southeastern areas of Scotland potentially with that thunderstorm risk continuing, and behind it we see some more thunderstorms breaking out across much of England and Wales. But away from this risk, dry, sunny and again another very humid and warm day.
And morning to you again, 11 a.m. on Wednesday, the 31st of July, live across the United Kingdom, Britain's Newsroom with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Very good morning. So former BBC presenter Hugh Edwards has pleaded guilty to making indecent images of children. He left Westminster Magistrates Court only a few moments ago.
And the streets of Southport, it's the big clean-up the morning after the night before, after the rioting which followed the savage death of 3 young girls at that Taylor Swift summer camp.
And Lawless.
And we've got Will Hollis, who's in
The soundtrack
Southport.
of Southport overnight was that of police sirens and helicopters. Today it's been replaced by street sweepers and an army of people coming to clean up the mess that they say people who do not live here made.
And a heavier police presence here this morning as community continue to bring flowers following an attack which has rocked this community here in Southport.
Lawless Britain overnight, 6 people arrested after a machete fight broke out in Southend-on-Sea, just yards from the fun fair. Is Britain broken?
And if you think train tannoy announcements are too complicated, don't worry, as some major railway services are swapping the phrase "this train terminates here" in favour of "this train ends its journey here." I don't even like the grammar, to be honest. It's to make language easier, apparently, for everyone to understand. Shouldn't be "this train ends its journey here." It should be "this train journey ends here."
It's clumsy. Because we don't think people can understand the English language, and it's being rewritten by people who clearly don't understand the English language either.
Honestly, we're living in an idiocracy, aren't we? Let us know your thoughts this morning. gbnews.com/your say. First, though, the very latest news with Sophia Wensler.
Beth, thank you. Good morning. It's 2 minutes past 11. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Let's recap that breaking news. Former BBC presenter Hugh Edwards has pleaded guilty at Westminster Magistrates Court to 3 counts relating to images of children. It's a significant fall for the 62-year-old who was once the BBC's most senior news presenter. He's now admitted to receiving 41 images on WhatsApp, 7 of which are the most serious kind. The court heard that he'd taken part in an online chat with another adult man who sent him the images. Sir Keir Starmer has accused those involved in a riot in Southport last night of hijacking a peaceful vigil with violence and thuggery. He said they'd insulted the community as it grieves for the 3 young girls who were killed in Monday's stabbing attack and warned they'd feel the full force of the law. It started when a group of around 300 people who'd gathered outside a mosque turned on police, throwing rocks larger than bricks and setting cars alight. Many were supporters of the English Defence League and were not from Southport. They'd been encouraged by false posts on social media which claimed the attacker was Muslim. Nearly 40 officers were injured and 27 were taken to hospital. Jenny Stancoombe, whose daughter Elsie died in Monday's attack, pleaded on social media for the violence to end, saying the police have been nothing but heroic. They and we don't need this. Local residents told GB News some of the violence appeared to be coordinated.
It was all people from outside of town that were brought in buses and cars. They got changed when they got here into the streets, and then they started to riot with the police, set a police van on fire, and all hell broke loose.
We could see on social media this was being planned. There are far-right fascist groups just seized the opportunity, seized on misinformation on the internet to mobilise and spread their hateful agenda.
In other news, Hamas's top political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, has been killed during an attack on the Iranian capital. The terror group is publicly blaming Israel for the attack. Israel hasn't commented yet, but has previously vowed to eliminate Hamas's leaders. The US says it's working to ease tensions, but confirmed it would help defend Israel if it were attacked. The strike on Tehran comes hours after Israel killed a senior Hezbollah commander in the Lebanese capital of Beirut. Israeli officials say he was behind Saturday's rocket attack on the Golan Heights, which killed 12 people, mostly children. It raised fears of further escalation, with Qatar warning it undermines the chances of peace and the region risks slipping into chaos. Angela Rayner is playing down suggestions of a backlash against the government's house-building drive as she launches a new towns task force. The Deputy Prime Minister told MPs yesterday the government was restoring mandatory housing targets for local authorities after they were scrapped by the Conservatives. She's also appointed 2 experts to lead an effort to create communities of at least 10,000 homes each. Housing Minister Matthew Pennycook told GB News the government has its work cut out for them.
Inheritance we're picking up is absolutely dire. We're looking at new housing supply dipping under 200,000 homes a year, partly due to some of the changes the government made late last year, abolishing mandatory housing targets, which we reversed in the changes we made to national planning policy yesterday. So it's a 5-year target. It's stretching. We think it's achievable, partly because of those changes we made yesterday. But with this new towns task force bringing forward appropriate locations for large-scale new communities across the country, over and above that target that we've announced on local authorities across England to bring forward 370,000.
In Paris, triathlons have been allowed to take place today after tests showed the River Seine is clean enough. It's after the men's event was cancelled yesterday over fears the famous river was too polluted. But World Triathlon says the water is much healthier today, which is good news for Team GB, with Beth Potter picking up a bronze medal in the women's triathlon this morning. And while the skies are a little gloomy in London this morning, heat warnings remain in place across the UK. Parts of England are forecasting 28 degrees today, which is expected to continue into Friday. But if you fancy a last-minute trip to the beach, you better be quick because thunderstorms are expected later in the week. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler, more in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good morning, welcome to Britain's Newsroom, live across the UK on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So, extraordinary scenes at Westminster Magistrates Court where the former BBC presenter Hugh Edwards has pleaded guilty to making indecent images of children, some as young as 7. Let's cross now to our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who's at the court. Mark.
Well, it was the most surreal of spectacles to watch Hugh Edwards, someone known so well to me and so many people right across this country as such a prominent face of BBC News, standing in the dock, giving his name, his address in southwest London and his date of birth, and then to gasps in the court confirming that he was pleading guilty to these images or charges of making indecent images, some 41 images in total, 7 category A, the most serious and explicit of sexual images, 1 involving a child as young as 7, another 12 category B images, and 22 which are classed as category C images, and they were a mixture of still images and moving video. The court has been told the youngest child, as I say, 7 years old, it's believed, the oldest up to 15 years of age. It was 3 separate counts that were put to Hugh Edwards, and he pleaded guilty to all 3 of those counts. And now what will happen is that he will appear back here at Westminster Magistrates Court on the 16th of September for a pre-sentencing hearing. We are in a stage at the moment where pre-sentencing reports are being prepared, and they will examine lots of different aspects around any previous offending behaviour, his previous good character, issues, of course, that have been well publicised around his mental health problems, the fact that he has pleaded guilty at the earliest opportunity, and it was the very, very earliest opportunity, his first court appearance here at this magistrates' court. That will, because of the rules around sentencing, result in a discount on his sentence as well. And there's a few options open to the magistrate here. It's possible that he could decide to deal with the sentencing right here at Westminster Magistrates Court if it's a sentence of 12 months or less. But if he feels that the sentence that's required needs to be more than 12 months, then it would have to be referred up to the Crown Court and a further sentencing hearing arranged at the Crown Court. But we'll know on the 16th of September, I think, once the judge has heard those pre-sentencing reports, what he is minded to do. It's perfectly possible that he could decide to pass sentence at that particular time on that particular day. The defence team for Hugh Edwards, when they spoke briefly here in court, they were keen to point out that although the charge specifies making indecent images of children, he was not making, they said, these images in the traditional sense. Rather, he was accessing images, downloading and opening attachments to images via the WhatsApp chat group. But he has pleaded guilty now, and this former BBC presenter will be back here on the 16th of September.
Thanks, Mark. That's Mark White, our Home Security Editor at Westminster Magistrates Court, in a momentous court hearing this morning.
So, moving on, violent protests broke out last night as demonstrators clashed with police outside a mosque in Southport. 39 officers were injured, with some suffering fractures and concussion off the back of the stabbing frenzy.
A clean-up operation is underway. We're going to cross to Southport now and speak to our reporter, Will Hollis. We think we've got Deswell.
Because there was the sound of helicopters overhead, and people were worried about what was happening to their community. They were seeing it in person and on social media. Violent disorder playing out on the streets, and the police, as well as local people, said that the people causing this trouble weren't from around here. And that's the same thing that Norman Wallace, who's a local businessman, runs the Southport Pleasureland, would say. You're sure that these people weren't from Southport's area that were causing the violence?
Absolutely. They were brought in by people with another agenda that have hijacked a very sad incident. They're not from this area. Despicable behaviour, cowards, organised, and it's just terrible what they've done. But this is not the face of Southport. This is not the true Southport. This morning, the community's come together, cleaned up the street. Southport is a very safe place to live, to work and to visit, as it always has been. It's a really good place. But these people are coming from elsewhere, and what they've done is just terrible.
What is it that they've done? We've seen it on the screens, but what did you see as a local person in Southport happening in this seaside town?
They set fire to a police van. They set fire to dustbins. They used bricks from people's walls to use as projectiles and throw at the police, and anything they could to cause mayhem. But they've all come, cowards, masked, all in black and hoodies with masks on, and they're just cowards. The hijacking, a very, very sad incident that's happened, again, which is a one-off incident, an isolated incident in our town, which is very sad for all the people involved. And Southport is so tight-knit, everybody knows someone that actually knows the families. That's how tight it is. And this morning, hundreds of people have been here on this street, worked together and cleaned the street up again. And now we're open for business. So please, there should be no fear for anyone to come to Southport, to visit Pleasureland, and to have a good time and feel safe.
It's a very different picture to right where we were standing last night. We couldn't get in here because of the rows of people and the rows of police officers. We've heard from the North West Ambulance Service that police officers, about 39 of them, were taken for treatment, broken noses. You can hear the noise in the background. The clean-up operation is still ongoing, heavy machinery in the background, but people were really hurt in this. How is the community feeling now, the morning after something very bad happening, after another very bad incident, the killing of 3 girls?
the community is feeling motivated to come together to show the rest of the world that this is not the true face of Southport. And that's very important, and you can see that by all the comments last night and this morning.
Norman, very noisy here. Thank you for joining us on GB News. We know that you've been speaking to a lot of people from the TV, and it's good to have a voice of a local person that can speak on behalf of a community that's hurting. The community is really hurting, Bev and Andrew, but we know that it is coming together at a time when people from outside of the town, local people say, are trying to tear these streets apart.
Thank you, Will. Will Hollis there. And just to remind you as well, the mother of Elsie Sankum, who died, the little blonde girl, she has issued a statement. She said, "This is the only thing that I will write, but please stop the violence in Southport. The police have been nothing but heroic this last 24 hours, and they and we do not need this."
Ripping bricks out of people's garden walls to throw at the police.
It achieves nothing. It achieves absolutely nothing. Right, joining us now is retired Scotland Yard detective Mike Neville. Good morning, Mike. Thank you for joining us. I say that this violence and these riotings, it achieves nothing. What do the protesters, let's call them that kindly, what do they think they're going to achieve, Mike, on an evening like that?
Well, I don't think a lot of them want to achieve much, really. They've turned up for the sort of fun of throwing rocks at the police, if that's fun at all. What I've picked up on recently, though, is in a sense, with the reaction to the Manchester, the kicking of the suspect on the ground, is people I thought were quite rational are really angry about things, and they're saying, "Oh, it's almost justified doing things like that." And I just think the whole country is polarised, and it's seeing the most awful crime that occurred in Southport, and they feel that, not these characters, but just the people I deal with, they feel that the government has let them down, that they see these attacks happening time and time again, and nothing is done about it. But, of course, the thing to do about it is not to riot in the street and set fire to police vans. But something must be done, because people just feeling so frustrated that they feel they're not being protected. If their kids can't go to a dance class, where can they go?
Saw the pictures as well in Southend, Mike, from last night. Look, it's a hot day. You know, you've got these teenagers just running riot on the streets, these absolute thugs just attacking each other with machetes. What would be the chances of a police officer getting involved in a situation like that? There are some people in tabards that I thought at first might have been the police that were just stepping back and letting them get on with it. There's now a suggestion that maybe they aren't police officers, but they're security. You can see them in the bottom of the footage there, that these guys maybe are security officers from the fairground. But there's nothing they can do in that situation, Mike, is there?
These security officers are told, if you tackle people and get injured, you're not insured. It's that bad. That's why we see people just brazenly shoplifting and walking by the security guards, because the security staff are told, don't intervene. But those pictures that you show in Southend, people take the children there to that fun fair, and you've got thugs running around with machetes, chains, a gun. It is absolutely horrendous, and it just feels really lawless. And people are afraid, I think, to leave their home.
What can the police do, Mike? Because, I mean, it's for the police to have to challenge a young man or 6 young men wielding a 3-foot blade. I suppose they can taser them. But, I mean, are we going to have to get to the point where we're going to have to consider arming the police more intensively?
Yeah, I think that we're coming to that point, Andrew, because the police as we have them are really designed for sort of 19th century policing, and the rest of the world, people usually compare it with America and say, "Oh, the police are shooting everybody," but of course you compare it with Europe. All the European forces carry weapons. Countries much the same as ourselves, Australia, New Zealand, they all carry firearms. It's just part of the standard equipment. I was in the military police. You were issued a pistol. That's part of the equipment. And when you see scenes like that, of course, as an officer, as you say, the taser, it doesn't always work. So when you're challenging somebody with a firearm or an enormous machete, you're taking your chances by having to get close enough to them to taser them. But it just shows how brave some officers are.
On that, Mike, not all police officers have tasers, far from it, and some police constables don't want tasers at all on their patch.
That's right, but we're coming to a point where it's a case of, you know, you've got to carry something, because it's not just about you. Your job as a police officer is to keep the community safe. My view as a police, when I was a police officer, was you have to run towards the trouble, not run away from it, and that means you need the desired equipment so you can keep people safe.
All right, thank you, Mike. Mike Neville there. I don't want armed police routinely on our street. I think we've got to be really careful in these situations of what we leap towards. Right, we've got to go, but Kemi Badenoch could be the next Tory leader. She's been accused, though, of being a bully. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Most people will be familiar with French artists such as Auguste Renoir, Claude Monet and Camille Pissarro, who, with others, made up the Impressionist movement of the late 19th century. But we are probably less familiar with the British contingent of the Impressionists, artists like Frank Bramley, Elizabeth Armstrong Forbes and Walter Langley, amongst many others. David Messam is on a mission to change that. I'm joined by David Messam and by Patrick Duffy, an esteemed archivist. These people we're talking about, are they really Impressionists? I mean, I assume they're British, but are they Impressionists?
I think we had the same query when we wrote a book about the whole thing in '85, actually. And the book nearly went out as The Garden of Bright Images, actually, though my author then, Laura Wortley, was quite insistent that it should be called The Garden of Bright Images, but I thought it'd probably be put in the gardening section, actually. So, you know, the question you ask is what is on other people's minds, too, actually. Have we got Impressionism in this country? I think for me, as I used to do quite a lot of shopping, if you like, in America, looking for English pictures out there, and they've got American Impressionism, and I'm quite happy with it, but the English are different.
Were they friends and colleagues? Were they collaborators with the French Impressionists?
Broadly speaking, British Impressionism is, as we term it, is the post-Impressionist movement. So they were certainly inspired by the French Impressionist movement as it was, but they came later. They travelled around Europe and became attuned on plein-air painting, so painting outdoors, and that's what they brought over with them. We call it British realism, but there's a focus.
British realism, I kind of recognise that.
Yes.
I mean, that's exactly what that looks like.
The People's Channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions. That raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way.
Might be cold in this studio.
That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom with me, Bev, and Andrew Pearce, of course. We've got former Labour MP Stephen Pound, I've promoted you then, and
demoted, actually.
Yeah, Mike Parry in the studio with us. Gentlemen, right, so we talk about the Tory leadership battle. Kemi Badenoch.
Can I just say, has not exactly set the country alight.
Really a battle, is it?
People are not exactly talking about it in the dog and duck.
We speak of little else.
Who's going to be the next Tory leader?
Yeah, but I think that's a good thing, because I think it's almost a bit like what you call a soft launch, isn't it, for a new project? You know what I mean? Just do it without causing too much attention, and it'll happen in the background. I'm glad it's happening without much interest from the rest of the world.
Because the public is not interested.
Exactly. And if you observe the complete indifference of the country as to who is going to be the next leader of the Tory party, it makes it even less interesting. You know what I mean?
I think it's extremely important. It's very, very important. You know, basically,
because we need a proper opposition to challenge an overmighty executive.
Well, yeah, if only. But don't forget,
already scrapped the European Scrutiny Committee without a vote.
what I was about to say was, in the interest of democracy, you do have to actually have a proper opposition. Now, on the one hand, I've got no skin in the game. I mean, as a Democrat and as a person who's a patriot, I want to see a valid opposition. Yeah. My suggestion is that they actually give Ian Duncan Smith the job for 6 months and let them have a proper, not navel-gazing, but just working out what are Conservatives for. Yeah. I mean, are they going to tack towards the Tugendhat wing, or are they going to work towards the Nigel Farage wing, or are they actually going to go and actually be Conservative?
Well, if they were Conservative, they might actually win an election.
Well, exactly. All these people say, we've got to move to the centre. Mrs Thatcher wasn't in the centre.
Yes, she was not.
And the reason David Cameron, brought the country to a standstill in terms of politics with no opposition is because he became a Liberal Democrat. And that did nothing. As for Kemi Badenoch, story, of course, this morning's on the front of The Guardian.
Where else?
She's now been accused of bullying within her department. We've seen this a few times before, haven't we? Yes. With Tory politicians.
Dominic Raab, the Justice Secretary, had to resign. And Priti Patel was accused of bullying, but Boris Johnson said thank you very much to the ministerial czar. Yes. I'm not sacking her.
I agree, but this is a Labour Party tactic, Stephen, because years ago, Alistair Campbell told me at some Labour Party conference...
He was Blair's communication boss.
He was Blair's communication boss, but this was before he'd become that, and he was very close to Neil Kinnock. And he actually said to me at a party conference, you know what, Mike, it's not just good enough for us to win the next election. When we do, we have to get the people we want into every institution in this country, into the army, into the police force, into the NHS and the civil service. And isn't it strange how many bullying allegations seem to arise against Tory ministers and Tory politicians, and very few seem to arise against Labour politicians?
I can remember when the mobile phones were flying around in the Treasury, and there was endless accusations against Gordon Brown and against many
Nobody went public.
I was about to say
they certainly did go public. Yeah.
Who?
Well, against Gordon, they did.
No, that was rumour.
Yeah, no, Spencer Livermore was talking about it. I mean, Hazel Blears was talking about it.
House of Lords.
Yeah. I only read one story once about Gordon Brown apparently got angry and pushed somebody out of a chair and jumped onto a keyboard or something like that. But again, it was very wishy-washy, might have happened, whereas with Dominic Raab and Priti Patel, official investigations were set up. And in my view, they've now lowered the bar so low for the allegation of bullying that I think in one case with Dominic Raab, he was accused of bullying because he scolded a member of his department for getting facts wrong in a briefing paper that had been prepared for him.
Which is what he should have.
Well, don't forget, Jacob Rees-Mogg was accused of bullying because he left a note on somebody's desk saying, I was in here this morning, where were you? But the stuff that came out about John Prescott, believe you me, that came from within the civil service.
But I hear that, but there were no official reports into investigations.
Exactly. Is there an official report into the Kemi Badenoch?
No, they're trying to start one.
Yeah. But there isn't one.
So 3 senior civil servants felt bullied. I wish 333 felt bullied, because I think ministers should boot these civil servants around the place a bit more.
Jacob Rees-Mogg was one of the best Home Office ministers we've had.
Well, the thing is, you shouldn't have to bully people to get the best out of them. You shouldn't have to. And I tell you what, the younger generation just won't have it.
They won't.
Is it bullying or is it being robust, Mike?
Well, this is what I'm saying. The definition of bullying has changed. Now, if you'd have worked in a newspaper in the 80s, right? If you'd have worked for some of the editors I worked with, well, certainly in the 80s, and then it started getting a bit better. But Andrew and I can tell you that bullying was not just an occasional problem. It was a 24-hour-a-day, everyday event when your editor was telling you you were no good, you had no stories, you had to do better, your job was on the line. That was the constant working atmosphere of a Fleet Street newsroom.
The reality is, getting on from what Bev said, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And I think ultimately it's not particularly productive because people are scared and they will leave for another place at the
first.
They
will. It's bad management style these days. In 2024,
that's the expression I was looking for.
It's really poor management style.
But I still think I would like... People say about Kemi Badenoch, she would cross the street to start a fight. No bad thing. because I don't think the civil service has been delivering what the country's needed. I think they deliberately blocked a lot of what the Tories were trying to do,
I agree.
particularly in the Home Office.
This is the blob, isn't it?
The blob.
It is the blob.
It is.
And isn't it a bit surprising that there were any civil servants around to bully her, or for her to bully, because most of them work from home? That's right.
Did Michael Gove ever credit you with that? Because you were actually talking about the sort of the institutional inertia of the civil service before Michael Gove came. Did you ever get any credit for that?
Why do I need the credit? I'm a mere humble hack. I'm a mere humble hack.
And getting back to David Cameron, Andrew, you're an expert in politics.
Mere humble hack.
Isn't the first thing he should have done when he became Prime Minister to have cleared out these people in the civil service who were institutionally against... Yes, all of them. They were institutionally against Conservative politics.
I can remember when the new Labour government got in '97, again and again, the heads of information were being
changed
and sympathised
by Alistair Campbell.
Absolutely. And when Cameron got in, he should have changed all that, and also he should have said that wretched Human Rights Act out. He should have got rid of the whole Blair mindset, but he adopted it, I'm afraid, which is why the Tories have never recovered, because they've never governed proper Tory administration ever since.
So similar. Right, Stephen, Mike, thank you so much. Sophia Wensler, she's very patient. She's waiting for us again with your news. Here she is.
Bev, thank you. It's 11:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Your headlines. Hugh Edwards has pleaded guilty at Westminster Magistrates Court to 3 counts relating to images of children. It's a significant fall for the 62-year-old, who was once the BBC's most senior news presenter. He's now admitted to receiving 41 images on WhatsApp, 7 of which are the most serious kind. The court heard that he'd taken part in an online chat with another adult man who sent him the images. Sir Keir Starmer has accused those involved in a riot in Southport last night of hijacking a peaceful vigil and says they'll feel the full force of the law. It's after a crowd who'd gathered outside a mosque turned on police, throwing rocks larger than bricks and setting cars alight. They'd been encouraged by false posts on social media, which claimed the attacker was Muslim. Nearly 40 officers were injured and 27 were taken to hospital. Hamas's top political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, has been killed in an attack on the Iranian capital. The terror group is publicly blaming Israel for the strike. It comes hours after Israel killed a senior Hezbollah commander in the Lebanese capital, raising fears of further escalation. Angela Rayner says Labour was elected on a manifesto to build more houses as she plays down suggestions of a backlash. The Deputy Prime Minister unveiled a plan that'll see mandatory housing targets for local authorities. She's also appointed experts to lead an effort to create a series of new communities of at least 10,000 homes each. In Paris, triathlons have been allowed to take place today after tests showed the River Seine is clean enough. It's after the men's event was cancelled yesterday over fears the famous river was too polluted. And in news just in, Alex Yee has just won Team GB's 5th gold medal in the men's triathlon. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler, more in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2838 and €1.1851. The price of gold is £1,888 and 30 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 8,389 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Breaking news, as you've just heard, Great Britain's Alex Yee has won a gold medal in the men's triathlon at the Paris Olympics. No offence, but I wish I'd been watching the triathlon and sat here with you. I love the Olympics, I love the triathlon.
But also, he deserves more than the gold medal because he had to swim in that disgusting River Seine, which, remember, Macron said he would dive into, bathe in, but not put his head in.
Amazing.
And, of course, never did.
Can't wait to watch the highlights.
And, of course, that means that we're ahead of the United States of America now in the medal table. Not
For now.
all about
May not last.
tallying
Yes,
up
it
his
is.
medals.
Yes, it won't happen once
Did you
the
see how the New York Times is doing their medal table, though, compared to... It's different to any other newspaper on the face of the planet. They're totting up every single medal, because America has a whole bunch of silvers and bronzes, but not many golds.
Right.
So they're doing the whole medal total as if a bronze is the same as gold.
That's what
Everyone
they're
else
saying.
ranks it by golds.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
How many will have dysentery?
Well done him for getting gold.
Yeah,
was he defending his gold? I think he was, wasn't
I think
he?
he might have been, but apparently he had an amazing comeback. He was behind and then he managed to he got silver in Tokyo and he closed the gap right at the last minute.
Gold. And did
he managed
the
to overtake them.
Second place, hope so.
I don't know who came second yet, but
definitely want to
right,
be.
I'll be sat here with you.
Always, it is. It really
right,
is.
what else are you talking about this afternoon, guys?
Goodness me. Well, of course, as we speak, Westminster Magistrates' Court is hearing the most extraordinary trial. The former lead presenter for the BBC, Hugh Edwards, is there. Mark White, our
Home
Security editor, is...
Get a grip, Tom.
My goodness, do you know what?
Are you overwhelmed by this Olympic
about
fever?
medals. We're going to be outside Westminster Magic. Do you know what? I'm just going to head off now.
Emma, go on, Emma. What are you
doing?
The Magistrates' Court, with all of the latest from the Hugh Edwards trial.
Sure.
And also we're going to be talking, of course, about the hangover from yesterday's riot in Southport, and also what's been happening in Southend. People running riot with, well, not quite literally running riot, but running around with enormous machetes.
Right by the fun fair where the children playing, and it's summer holidays time. So appalling,
so
isn't
we'll
it?
be talking about all of the sort of lawlessness and chaos that seems to be unfolding this week, and we'll also be getting the latest on everything that's been happening in Southport.
Sure. OK.
All
sounds
right.
good.
Tom will have learnt to string a sentence together.
I will. I'm going to have a sharp coffee.
Yes.
Tom and Emma from Midday. Up next, though, are Labour breaking promises already? We're going to hear from the Chancellor. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Dry and sunny and warm for most of us. It's feeling increasingly humid over the next few days. And that's going to increase the threat of thunderstorms for some areas. Low pressure's not too far away across the near continent. That's where that threat of thunderstorms is coming from. Further north, though, high pressure still dominating, so plenty of dry and warm weather. Quite a lot of sunshine as well. Still some hazier sunshine here and there across parts of northern England, some areas of Northern Ireland and the far north of Scotland still holding on to a bit of cloud and possibly some rain. But where we do see the long-lived sunshine across southern areas, temperatures will likely climb into the 30s once again this afternoon. But it's across the southeast where there's a risk of thunderstorms. There is some uncertainty in whether they will bring any impacts, but I think you will likely see some lightning offshore. Further north, though, no risk of thunderstorms across Scotland. It's likely to be a slightly warmer evening this evening than last night. It was quite a chilly night, actually, across Scotland compared to elsewhere in the country. So temperatures in the mid-teens, 20s for some areas of central southern Scotland, and some cloud around, but mainly a dry and pleasant evening for most of us. But there's still this threat of thunderstorms and a warning in force for the southeast throughout this afternoon and into this evening. But the threat really does increase overnight tonight as an area of thunderstorms develops across parts of Wales and across the southeast. And those will push north and eastwards overnight. So there's a wider area that's covered by this thunderstorm warning. We could see some localised impact due to flooding, lightning and some fairly large hail as well. And it's going to be a humid night for most of us. As I said, a milder night tonight across Scotland than last night as well. So potentially a pretty wet start to the day across some eastern areas of England, some southeastern areas of Scotland potentially with that thunderstorm risk continuing. And behind it, we see some more thunderstorms breaking out across much of England and Wales. But away from this risk, dry, sunny and again another very humid and warm day.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
11:40, this is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
So the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has finally confirmed, she didn't manage to do this during the 6-week general election campaign, did she, that there will be tax rises in the budget, which is in October.
So our Labour breaking promises already. Our political editor, Chris Hope, joins us. Good morning, Chris. We haven't seen you for a little while, so it's nice to see you. We've been on our holidays. I imagine you have too. Right, so it's all going on now, of course. Labour are in the driving seat. And is the sense that Rachel Reeves is now pedalling back on some of the promises she made before the election?
Morning, Bev. Morning, Andrew. That's right. It does seem that way, doesn't it? We know there'll be a budget on October the 30th, and now a lot of politics is working out which taxes might go up or might go down. We know from the government, from Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, she won't increase income tax, VAT or national insurance, and she won't touch the triple lock which protects the state pension for millions of pensioners. But we have seen already this week how the government will abandon this winter fuel allowance, which will benefit so many millions of pensioners and will push some into fuel poverty. But what's quite interesting is on a podcast last night, she admitted, the Chancellor, for the first time that she will have to increase taxes in the budget, and she refused to rule out increases on wealth taxes, that's inheritance tax and capital gains tax, and the speculation they might try and increase capital gains tax to the level of income tax at 40%. Currently that's around 20%. But it struck me, it reminded me of an interview I did with Rachel Reeves when she was a shadow Chancellor on May the 29th, and I asked her particularly about wealth taxes. Here's what she had to say. Nothing on wealth taxes yet. Is that that's the treasure chest you're keeping locked up?
Labour will not be introducing wealth taxes.
On homes, that kind of thing, capital gains tax?
Labour are not going to be introducing wealth taxes. Indeed, Chris, we've set forward our plans and they are all fully costed and fully funded. And there will be nothing in our manifesto that requires any further increases in taxation.
There we have Rachel Reeves, now the Chancellor, with her hands on the Exchequer and tax-raising powers, saying clearly twice we will not be introducing wealth taxes. She went on to talk about the manifesto, but it was clear to me she was really giving a guarantee, I think, to GB News viewers and listeners that wealth taxes won't go up. So I think watch this space, because it looks like they're moving towards that in the briefing now.
How defensive are they over the shoal of emails, texts and statements we've seen now from people like Rachel Reeves, Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and others? I think also the Prime Minister saying that the winter fuel allowance was safe in Labour's hands. I think Darren Jones said that as recently as 6 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's hard to reconcile that. Now, what's been happening with this new government, they've been pitch rolling for cuts elsewhere on spending and also tax increases. We saw it, didn't we, Andrew and Bev, by the Tory party back in 2010, helped by that Liam Byrne letter saying there's no money left. Of course, he was the number 2 in the Treasury, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. So the government's gone in there. They found apparently a £22 billion black hole. That is partially supported by the Office for Budgetary Responsibility and people in the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the independent watchdog. But the Tories are apoplectic. They say they knew what was coming, the government, this Labour government, but they didn't want to say what their plans were. And these are awkward remarks, aren't they, I think, from Darren Jones on the issue of the winter fuel payment. And also, I should say, frankly, what on earth would Rishi Sunak be saying about this? If he had hung on with his election by another 6 months, he would have guaranteed that payment for millions of pensioners this winter, because it would be too late to axe it. So yet again, another reason for so many Tories to regret this early election.
Yeah.
Chris, you and I were in the Commons yesterday, and we were talking, and there were Labour MPs angry about it too, and you interviewed Stella Creasy, the Labour MP, about it yesterday. A lot of anger that the government shows on the very last day of term, because we're in recess now, to scrap the European Scrutiny Committee, which has been looking at legislation spewing out of the EU. We're not in the EU anymore, but of course this government wants to be closer to the European Union. Legislation may affect us, and they've got rid of that watchdog committee. A very important moment.
And I'm so sorry, Chris, but we've run out of time. We have to move on, but still to come. Good to see you, Chris Hope there. Are we heading for a farming crisis? Have the rural community been forgotten by the government? We'll have expert analysis next. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Football and gambling can go hand in hand and cause long-term problems. New figures show that young adults aged between 16 and 24 who have bet over the last year are more likely to report mental health issues compared to those in older age groups.
And joining us now to discuss this is Matt Burgess, who is a former gambling addict and now helps those to deal with their own gambling issues.
Yeah, look, I think gambling is one of those things that is so accessible now. Everyone's got a kind of mobile phone in their pocket, walk around with a kind of 24-hour casino, if you like. So I think it's really important that people realise that we have to sort of recognise that is a month of quite condensed gambling, and we don't want people to sort of carry that on into their everyday life, because that's when it can become really risky and it could become addictive.
I had no idea, though, that it was linked to first-time gambling. For the first time, people might be able to pick up and have a go. And then it doesn't end there. It goes on, because by then you've got the bug. Is that how it works?
You've got to remember, for things like the Euros, the World Cup, so you get a lot more people watching football and therefore potentially betting on football.
May I ask you about how severe your own gambling addiction got?
Well, look, I think there was a couple of touch points for me where I realised that things were getting out of hand. There were some times at university where, I kind of thought, I'm definitely doing this a bit too much, but, kind of thought maybe it would move on once I left, but it didn't. It did follow me. And then, I got to points where I was at my worst gambling 16, 17 hours a day. I was spending huge amounts of money. It can spiral out of control very, very quickly, and that was the important thing that we want to highlight is, what can start as fun can become very, very dangerous in a sense.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom. So are we heading for a farming crisis? Has the government forgotten the rural community?
Well, here he is. Doogie is all the way over from Northern Ireland with us in the studio. Doogie, the King's Speech, no mention of farming at all. Why do you think there's a problem?
Well, there's a problem because Britain is obviously becoming closer to Europe once more. Those European legislations and regulations that have caused so much trouble in Europe itself. We've seen riots in Holland and France and so forth all around farming. Now, farming incomes, why this came to my attention was there was a report just a couple of weeks ago in Northern Ireland that snuck out, and it basically said 22-23 farming incomes in Northern Ireland were down 47.6%.
Wow, that's a huge amount.
Half their wages. We're not talking about turnover, we're talking about their incomes. And this is going to cause a food problem. I mean, Northern Ireland supplies millions of meals to Britain every single day. Its biggest sectors being dairy, chicken and beef. But it's just not Northern Ireland. This is right across the UK. Because the legislation that has been put in place is more about wilding, growing trees, cutting down on methane.
Because of the rush to net zero.
And it was that rush to net zero that Theresa May started.
Yeah.
In 2019.
Boris carried it on.
Boris carried it on, and it is now continuing. And we are now, in these few weeks that are here now, the farming community is renegotiating, because they have to at the end of each mandate, what subsidies are coming into farming, because they get single farm payment, etc. And the last government took so much of the single farm payment off them and handed it to them if they greened the land. Now that means taking land out of operation and growing trees and flowers. Now, if you're a tenant farmer, and I have spoke to many, many tenant farmers in the northeast of England and Scotland who are losing their farms because they don't own the farm, but the owners of those farms are now seeing more wealth in planting trees and greening the land. Now, back in 1980, we were 80% self-sufficient. Now we're less than 50%. Some would argue that it's more. Britain is the third biggest importer of food in the world. And if you look at our health crisis that's now, we're seeing rising obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and that has all came from that generation that was very, very much into processed food. And why are we farming to regulations that the rest of the world isn't farming to? Why are we doing that in Europe when they're importing from Brazil and Argentina?
Did we not leave the European Union?
Well, we did. Well, Northern Ireland could be argued that we didn't.
No, well, that's true.
But most of Britain left the EU, and they're being dragged back into it, and this net zero continues to rise. We have things like arable farmers need fertiliser. But if you are cutting your herds by a third, you're taking away 20% of your beef cattle and dairy to do away with methane. Natural manure is not being produced. So they're having to bring in artificial fertiliser that is made in Russia, Belarus, Europe, and that CO2, carbon from the lorries that transported across Europe into ferries, belting out much more CO2 into Britain, and then more lorries to transport.
And this business model, Doogie, is built upon this assumption that there is consensus that methane and carbon is bad for the environment. We need to move towards a carbon zero environment. And yet there's dispute about that. And in the meantime, the money gets pushed up and up and up to bigger transnational corporations, all in bed with governments around the world, and the farmers are the ones who end up with no money in their pocket. What do we do about it, though? What do we do?
Absolutely. I mean, USDA, Department of Agriculture, figures for the since 1970, have very much proved that agriculture is only responsible for about 9% of methane. And you can break that down into three parts. And Britain's cattle are mainly kept outside, so they're grass-fed cattle. They don't produce the same amount of methane. They're not inside being fed highly intensive soya meal, etc. That happens in the States. It doesn't happen here. And you have to ask the question, why are we farming by legislation the whole way through Europe? You know, what the climate is in France, in Spain, in Germany, is not the same as here. And we've had 3 months of really bad weather at the start of this year. I was up in Newcastle. Some of the winter barley crops are being reploughed back into the ground because they were destroyed. So this is going to affect
Agenda 2030, hurtling towards us, UN Sustainable Global Goals.
And it's going to put the cost of our food bill up every month.
Doogie, thank you so much. Nice to see you in the flesh. Right, let's finish the show with some good news. Great Britain's Lauren Henry, Hannah Scott, Lola Anderson and Georgie Brayshaw have won gold in the women's quadruple sculls rowing at the Paris Olympics.
Well done. Well done. Am I allowed to say well done, girls?
You can say well done,
I won't get into trouble for that, will I? Will I? Well, I've said it now.
They could probably crush you with a single thumb. You can call them girls. Yeah. Right, that's it from Britain's Newsroom for today. Up next, Good Afternoon Britain with Tom and Emma. See you tomorrow.
Now, it is raining gold medals, but coming up on Good Morning Britain, we are going to be talking about the latest from Southport, the riot following the vigil last night, and we'll also be going to the other end of the country, to Southend, to talk about the machete-wielding mob down there that has seen a number of arrests.
We'll also be outside Manchester Magistrates Court, or rather Westminster Magistrates Court, where Hugh Edwards has appeared this morning pleading guilty to making pictures of indecent pictures of children. That next.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.